Chapter 560. Just as Yi Qian made an awkward sound under the blanket, he heard a knock on the door. His scalp tightened, and he held his breath for a while. He didn't get up immediately, but listened to the movement outside. Yi Qian, I'm Qin Xiu. Standing outside the door, Qin Xiu, who was dressed in a suit and leather shoes, said politely, "You need to go to school this afternoon. The higher-ups asked me to bring you a set of clothes." So it was Qin Xiu. Yi Qian couldn't help but laugh at his own nervous behavior. He patted his face and calmed himself down before opening the door. Qin Xiu's gaze fell on her arm. The white bandage was quite eye-catching. Then he looked at her face. Because of her fair skin, the faint dark circles under her eyes were particularly obvious. She was indeed tired. Qin Xiu, who was about to come in, stood at the door and smiled. "This is for you. It's already dry-cleaned and ironed." Just now, the higher-ups called the Foreign Affairs Department and criticized the relevant staff for their lack of consideration. Everyone has at least 2 sets of formal wear, but they only prepared 1 set for you. This is a work mistake. Yi Qian didn't expect that the higher-ups would worry about his school uniform. He explained with a straight face, "1 set is enough. I don't need to wear the school uniform every day. There's no need to change it every day. 1 set is more than enough. You don't have to explain anything. This is indeed a work mistake. Under normal circumstances, 1 set of clothes is fine. But now that we're on an overseas visit, there are too many uncertainties. Preparing an extra set is a responsibility to your work." Qin Xiu had a good grasp of his tone and rhythm when he spoke. When he smiled, his voice was gentle, like the wind blowing through willows. When he talked about work, his tone dropped a little. Although he was still smiling, there was an invisible pressure that made people feel cold. He was a qualified foreign affairs staff member, and also an impeccably qualified translator. As the official translator of several national leaders, his redeeming qualities were incomparable to ordinary translators. He wouldn't explain too much about work to Yi Qian. Everyone had their own duties, and everything had its own correct process. In order to achieve one's position, one had to take care of every aspect of one's work. Not preparing an extra set of clothes sounded like a small matter, but there were no small matters in foreign affairs. A mistake was a mistake. He wouldn't explain too much to Yi Qian. He only reminded her that since the higher-ups were involved, it wasn't something she could interfere with. She had to understand that she didn't have the right to explain the staff members' mistakes. Yi Qian immediately, "Okay, I understand." "Anne." She weighed the paper bag in her hand, and smiled, "Thank you for bringing my school uniform." "You're welcome. Also, I just asked the hotel to prepare breakfast for you. The guards will send it over in 5 minutes." Qin Xiu saw that she understood what he meant and laughed in his heart. This girl was indeed a rare talent. His uncle was full of praise for her, and so were the higher-ups and the major general. It was obvious that she would become a great person in the future. Raising his hand, the sleeves of his black suit moved up slightly with his movement, revealing a white shirt cuff that was as white as new. Even the buttons were exceptionally exquisite. An expensive watch with a silver metallic luster was also revealed. Chapter 561. He glanced at his watch, then looked up at Yi Qian with a smile. "You don't have 5 minutes left. The dining car should be in the elevator by now. You can sleep after lunch. You'll feel full of energy when you wake up at noon. Also, the leader will be having lunch with Pakistan's Minister of Defense. After lunch at the hotel, a guard will come to pick you up." Seeing that Yi Qian was listening attentively and obediently, he pointed at the paper bag containing the school uniform. "There's a Walkman and a cassette tape inside. The first song you listen to is a famous Pakistani nursery rhyme. It's easy to learn, and it might come in handy this afternoon. Even this was carefully arranged. Yi Qian couldn't help but look at Qin Xiu. Was his sense of direction really that bad? He couldn't tell. Qin Xiu left quickly. His back was long and slender, and he walked out of Yi Qian's line of sight calmly. The dining car followed him. It was as if he deliberately didn't want to disturb her breakfast. As soon as the dining car arrived, he left. After breakfast, Yi Qian slept until midnight. When he opened his eyes, all the energy he had expended over the past few days had returned, and he was full of energy. The guard in charge of delivering lunch to Yi Qian punctually delivered it at 12 o'clock. After lunch, he waited in the room for the guard to arrive. At 1:30 in the afternoon, there was a rhythmic knock on the door. Just by listening to the sound, Yi Qian could guess who the guard was. Other than that dangerous man, who else could it be? 2 minutes, Yi Qian. Outside the door, Xia Jinyuan reminded him in a low and polite voice. There was a faint smile on his handsome face as he waited for the little fox who avoided him like a snake to come out. Originally, he wanted to give her some time to calm down. After all, he was also embarrassed by the incident, but he didn't expect the leader to directly ask him to come and pick her up. He couldn't refuse because of personal matters. Besides, it wasn't a big deal. After all, he was an adult man. How could he keep thinking about such a small matter? There was no taboo when it came to medical treatment. It was a matter of life and death that had to be explained in detail. Unexpectedly, the doctor's voice was a little loud. Even if the two of them wanted to pretend that they didn't hear it, they couldn't. At this moment, he had to be more serious. He couldn't let her continue to feel awkward. Therefore, he slightly tightened his voice and revealed a bit of coldness to let her understand that he was here for business. Yi Qian knew it was him. Although his breathing quickened, when he opened the door, Shuyan's expression was indifferent, and the corners of her eyes were calm and cool. You don't need 2 minutes. You can leave now. Very good. She didn't notice anything unusual. Xia Jinyuan glanced at her indifferently. When he turned around, the corners of his mouth lifted slightly. Miss Petty's school is in the wealthy district. The security there will be much safer than the slums. The decision was made suddenly and we didn't tell the school in advance to prepare anything. This was to prevent someone from using this matter to do something that would be detrimental to the visit. The leader won't go to school. He'll be accompanied by a diplomat. I'll be in charge of security. I'll ensure your safety during the 2-hour exchange. The car was parked in the basement. The driver was a motorist sent by Zhong Nanhai. Xia Jinyuan opened the car door for Yi Qian to get in first. Then he bent over and elegantly got into the car. Both of them sat in the back seat. Yi Qian, who thought that he would sit in front of her, saw this and her body tensed up slightly. Her breathing became sluggish as he closed the door. Her long eyelashes fluttered and her eyelids drooped. Chapter 562. Even the glass was bulletproof. After the car started, Xia Jinyuan reminded the driver to drive faster. He turned to Yi Jian, who was listening carefully, and said, "After this afternoon's cultural exchange, we will go back home at 6 o'clock. You're going back today. Isn't that 3 days earlier than expected?" Yi Qian pursed his lips and whispered, "Did something happen that requires you to go back early?" Pakistan was indeed a dangerous place. Al-Qaeda and terrorists would appear at any time. It was good to go back early. Xia Jinyuan noticed that her tense body gradually relaxed as they talked. A faint smile appeared in his eyes. Everything went well. That's why I was able to return home in advance. You can go back to the province tomorrow. What about the military training? Do you still need to go? It's okay if you don't go. You can rest in school for 2 days. The little fox had a strong ability to control her emotions. Although he liked to see her shy face, he hoped that she would be able to control her emotions well. Go back and participate in the military training. It's boring to stay in school alone. Yi Qian didn't think much and decided to go back and participate in the military training. After all, she had already gone back. There was no reason for her not to go back. She felt guilty for hiding the truth from her homeroom teacher, Miss Tong, who was very concerned about her. Xia Jinyuan nodded. That was fine too. She didn't have as much freedom in the province as she did in the town. There were many people in school and she couldn't stay in the dormitory all day. Participating in the military training would be more relaxing and free. There was a trace of guilt on her face just now. This trace of guilt was probably because of her homeroom teacher. Uncle Chen lived in the military area. Other than not being able to leave the military area, he could walk around freely in the military area. Therefore, her guilt was towards her homeroom teacher and classmates who cared about her. Little Fox had always been very soft-hearted towards people who were good to her. Yi Qian arrived at Miss Petty's school at 2:20 p.m. Although he didn't notify the school, they were notified before 10 a.m. The school immediately started to monitor the school. The car drove directly to the school. Miss Petty, who was holding a bouquet of flowers, saw Yi Qian get out of the car. She went up to Yi Qian and gave him a gentle hug. Thank you, Jane. Thank you for protecting her the night before. Thank you for saving the children in the orphanage. Thank you for preventing the situation from worsening and for saving her father from being criticized by the public. We are friends. Friends don't need to thank each other. Yi Qian gently patted her on the back. Miss Petty, we're both lucky to be able to return safely and live under the sun. The diplomatic staff accompanying them was Qin Shou. Every word that Yi Qian said was translated by him to the Pakistani teachers and students. They first toured the campus, then returned to the classroom to greet Miss Petty's students. When they talked about the cultures of the two countries, Yi Qian knew about the Pakistani culture in advance, so every word he said would receive enthusiastic applause from the Pakistani teachers and students. The atmosphere of the exchange was warm and harmonious. Yi Qian calmly answered the students' questions. One of the students asked Yi Qian if he was worried that the Chinese culture would be affected by foreign culture and disappear. For example, when she went to China last year, it happened to be Christmas. She sharply pointed out that the Spring Festival was a traditional Chinese festival, and Christmas was just a foreign festival. However, she saw that everyone was happy for the arrival of Christmas, and the Spring Festival was cold and cheerless. Chapter 563. Xia Jinyuan and Qin Shou both looked up and stared deeply at Yi Qian. The student who asked the question almost said in Chinese, "You worship foreign things." How would she answer? How would she refute the other party until they were speechless? The accompanying Pakistani staff also realized that such a question was too sharp. Just as they were about to ask the next student, Yi Qian suddenly said in Urdu, "It's okay." Her sudden sentence in Urdu made Xia Jinyuan's lips curl up slightly. Little Fox was indeed a little fox. With her intelligence, she would definitely be able to answer such a sharp question calmly. Although she could answer it, since the Pakistani student had thrown a brick to attract jade, there might be even sharper questions coming up. However, Xia Jinyuan felt that there was no need to waste time, so he said to Qin Shou, "We need to control the time of the questions. We need to leave the school before 4:30 p.m. It's already 4 o'clock p.m. His thoughts coincided with Qin Shou's. Qin Shou nodded and said in a low voice, "This is the last question. I'll talk to the teacher later." Miss Petty is also communicating with the staff around her. After Yi Qian answers, she can take a photo with the class as a souvenir and leave. We can't take a photo as a souvenir. Xia Jinyuan pressed his lips together. There was a dark coldness in his handsome face. It's not appropriate for Yi Qian to take a photo of her in a war-torn country. Translator Qin, please communicate with the Pakistani staff. Last night, Yi Qian met with members of the Al-Qaeda organization. If she takes a photo with them, she might get into trouble. This really reminded Qin Xiu. Hearing this, he said with a solemn expression, "It's my fault for not thinking it through. Cancel the group photo. Just sing a local children's song with her classmates will do." She is prepared. Yi Jian, who was standing on the podium, was wearing a simple and exquisite navy blue slim-fit uniform. She, who represented the thousands of students in China, had a faint smile on her beautiful face. Her eyes, which were as dark as the night, were shining with a bright light. She was calm inside. If a festival is a representation of culture, then our country is undoubtedly a country that accepts all cultures from all over the world and can accept the difference in foreign cultures. Hospitality is a good tradition of our country. A festival traveled across the sea to our country and was accepted by us. This is a big country's tolerance for foreign cultures. It is also a country's broad-mindedness. From what I understand, the two cultures will never clash, nor will they be forgotten. Just like our spring festival, it is also famous overseas. Could this be the annihilation of culture? No, this is precisely a kind of dissemination, letting more people know, and also letting more people accept it, bringing more happiness to more people. She paused for a moment. Under the gaze of several famous teachers, she stood on the podium like a pine tree in snow. With a faint smile, she had the aura of a great country. She said, "Take this student, for example. The language of Pakistan is Urdu, but you asked in English from beginning to end. Does this mean that you have abandoned your tradition and accepted a new culture? No, it's not that you have abandoned your tradition. You have accepted a foreign tradition, just like how Christmas was accepted by our country." What she said before was just a prelude. This sentence was the main point. The girl who asked the question had a faint smug look on her face, but in the end, she looked embarrassed. In the end, she had to sincerely say, "Thank you," and sit down under Miss Petty's cold gaze. This question was quickly heard by the Chinese leader, who laughed heartily. "That's why I said that the country will be strong if the young are strong. Little Yi is not bad. You can turn something invisible into something tangible. You can understand it at such a young age." Chapter 564. Wasn't that rare? The other party said that China worshipped foreign things and did not pay attention to its own traditions. Yi Qian first said that China was open to all cultures to express its attitude towards culture. Then he said that China was open-minded, which meant that China's people were hospitable and would not reject a festival that made them happy. Then he said that the girl had asked questions in English and did not speak her own language. He clearly told the other party that she had even abandoned her own language, so what right did she have to criticize China's acceptance of other cultures? After leaving the school, Miss Petty personally apologized to Yi Qian. That was enough. After all, it was not the Great Harmony. Moreover, she was not Chinese. No matter what, she could not be controlled. It was fine as long as the dignity of one's own country was protected. Qin Xiu took another car, but Miss Petty personally sent him over. He could only continue to stand beside Yi Qian until Miss Petty left. After getting into the car, Xia Jinyuan looked at Yi Qian calmly. He raised his eyebrows and smiled. "I didn't expect the little fox to be so eloquent. I saw that girl's face turn green just now. I guess no one has ever dared to talk to her like that." In Pakistan, the rich had many servants, and these servants had very low status. Naturally, they did not have the guts to refute the words of their masters. Naturally, the girl would not like others to have opinions about her words. Yi Qian smiled faintly. His eyebrows were cold. Being on good terms does not mean that we are weak. If I don't block this kind of question, she will understand the arrogance of Chinese students. She will still think that she is God. Therefore, after the big leader returned to China, he mentioned several times that the student he brought along this time was a good student who made people feel at ease and was not afraid of being bullied. At 6:00 in the evening, the Chinese leader who had finished the secret visit boarded the flight back to China. The Pakistani president personally sent him off, and his wife personally gave Yi Jian a set of gorgeous Pakistani girl's gauze dress with sparkling gems on it. She also welcomed Yi Jian to visit Pakistan again. Yi Qian naturally agreed politely. The 4-day visit ended with a gentle hug from the president's wife. When the plane soared into the sky, they saw the fiery red sun still hanging in the west. The color was bright and full of hope. Just like the leaders of this country, no matter how chaotic their country was, they still had a patriotic heart and worked hard for their country. During the 6-hour trip, the big leader and Yi Qian talked for at least an hour. He told the major general that the local troops must train Yi Qian well. He was a good seedling and must not be missed. He looked forward to seeing Yi Qian in a military uniform during the military parade one day. They arrived in Beijing at 12:00 midnight. The earliest flight to the provincial capital was at 5:20 the next morning. Yi Qian did not return to Beijing with the big leader. Instead, he stayed in a hotel next to the airport under Qin Shou's arrangement. Xia Jinyuan stood beside the major general and watched as Yi Qian bid farewell to the big leader and the major general. When he brushed past her, his slender hand gently touched Yi Qian's hand. Under everyone's gaze, a piece of paper slipped into Yi Qian's hand. "Call me tomorrow morning. I will wait for you," he said as he walked past. Yi Qian looked at his slender back and pursed his lips slightly. After returning to China, she did not want to have too much contact with him. Was it wrong for her to have such thoughts? But she really did not want to contact him. It was still the same as before. Dangerous men should be kept away. Chapter 565. They could work together on missions and stay as far away from each other as they could in life. This is the room card and this is the plane ticket. Keep them well. I've set up a wake-up call service. The service staff will call you at 4:00. Qin Xiu had been in charge of sending Yi Qian to the hotel. He took very good care of him and even prepared Yi Qian's military training uniform. This camouflage uniform was directly transferred from the army. It also has your school uniform. After you get off the plane, a car has been arranged. It will send you directly to the military training base. It's a little far and will take about 4 hours by car. It will arrive around noon. Qin Xiu was not only an interpreter by the leader's side. He also paid attention to the leader's residence and travel. The leader had arranged for him to take care of Yi Qian when he returned to the country and the province. This showed that the leader cared about Yi Qian. To Qin Xiu, Yi Qian was someone who had helped him before. He was even more attentive. "I'll send you back to the hotel now. Come, walk this way." Under the light, the man's face was handsome. He had the calmness of a mountain. When he smiled, he looked like a jade tree facing a flower and exuded the elegance of a rich young master. He smiled at Yi Qian. Even the hotel receptionist blushed. He was really a gentle and elegant man. Yi Qian did not know how to appreciate a man's beauty. When he heard this, he smiled and said, "No need, Interpreter Qin. I know the way. I know the way." Qin Xiu's smile deepened. His eyes were very dark. When he smiled, it was as if there was a small whirlpool that could suck people in. Classmate Xiao Yi, there's a deeper meaning to your words. Of course there was a deeper meaning. Yi Qian looked at his room card with smiling eyes. The room number was clearly written on it. Thank you, Interpreter Qin. I'll go up first. Goodbye. He did not say goodbye because the chances of them meeting again were extremely rare. She held a camouflage travel bag in each hand and left with light steps. She didn't stop until she entered the elevator. Before the elevator door closed, Qin Xiu saw her waving goodbye to him. What an interesting girl. Qin Xiu waved back. After the elevator door closed, he said to the driver beside him, "Let's go back to the diplomatic compound first. When you were checking in for Xiaoya, Madam called and said that you can call her back to tell her that you are safe after you are done with your work." The chauffeur was the exclusive chauffeur sent by the Qin family to pick up Qin Xiu. He was very respectful to Qin Xiu. "Are you going back now? Or do you want to go back after getting on the bus?" Qin Xiu glanced at his driver and asked flatly, "Did my mom say anything else?" "No, he only said that you would give Madam a call after you're done with your work." Although Madam Qin's husband was a diplomat, she was also a businesswoman with a certain status in China. Therefore, she had the strong side of a businesswoman, and it was the same at home. She said that she wanted her son to call back, so she would definitely wait by the phone. Even though Qin Xiu was going home soon, he still couldn't avoid this call. "Mom, yes, soon." While Qin Xiu was talking to Madam Qin emotionlessly, Yi Qian had also returned to the hotel. She placed the note Xia Jinyuan gave her on the bedside table. After taking a shower, she quietly looked at the unopened note. Her eyes were calm, and it was impossible to tell what she was thinking. After a while, she turned off the lights and went to bed. The note was still unopened. At 4 in the morning, Yi Qian didn't even need to be woken up. She took the note in her hand again and slowly opened it. It was a phone number, not a personal number. Chapter 566. Xia Jinyuan had already turned in his cell phone before he left for the mission, so he had to wait until tomorrow to get his cell phone back. That was why he left his home phone number. Since he had broken his promise to Xia Jinyuan when he returned from Australia, Yi Qian still dialed this number. After about 3 rings, the phone was picked up and an extremely serious and authoritative voice came through. "This is Xia Xinhui." After about 3 seconds of silence, Yi Qian almost threw the phone out of his hand. Xia Xinhui. She had seen this name often. She had often seen this Commander-in-Chief Xia's signature in military documents. Sorry, wrong number. This was the first time in his life that Yi Qian had lied. Yi Qian would forever remember the taste of lying and would never let it happen a second time. Xia Jinyuan, who had just finished showering, walked out with steam all over his body. He had just heard the phone in the living room ringing, but now it was gone. It couldn't be Little Fox calling, right? He had asked her to call him when she returned to the provincial capital. Wrong number. Okay, it's okay. Goodbye. Commander-in-Chief Xia didn't think much of it and thought that it was really a wrong number. After saying goodbye warmly, he saw his son coming down the stairs. He knew where Xia Jinyuan had gone for the mission this time and also knew how well his son had performed during the mission. Like father, like son. How could Xia Xinhui's son be wrong? The father and son sat in the living room and chatted. However, they didn't know that after Yi Qian hung up the phone, he grabbed his luggage and almost ran away. It was too scary. She actually called Xia Jinyuan's home, and it was Commander-in-Chief Xia's home. It definitely wasn't someone with the same name. She could feel Commander-in-Chief Xia's military power through the phone line. How could it be someone with the same surname? At this moment, Yi Qian really didn't know what to feel. He just wanted to leave quickly, go to the airport quickly, board the plane quickly, and leave quickly. Xia Jinyuan didn't expect that Yi Qian had already called. He waited until 9 o'clock and still didn't receive a call, so he asked the guards at home if they had received a call from a girl. Naturally, the answer was no. Commander-in-Chief Xiao's personal guards said, the Commander-in-Chief received a call at 4 o'clock in the morning saying that it was a wrong number. I heard the Commander-in-Chief hang up the phone and say with a smile, that girl is quite polite. Needless to say, it must be Yi Qian. Young Master Xiao let out a long sigh. His luck with women was completely out of the question. He finally received a call from Little Fox, but he still missed it. It was 4:00 in the morning. Wasn't that the time when she had just finished showering and was going downstairs? After thinking about it, the corners of young Master Xiao's mouth curled up slightly. His father had a habit of answering the phone with, "I'm Xia Xinhui." Little Fox often moved around the army, so she must be familiar with Xia Xinhui. She would definitely recognize him as soon as she heard his name. Poor little guy, he didn't know if he was frightened at that time. Yi Qian, who was so frightened that he flew back to the provincial capital, got into the military car. Listening to the familiar accent, the guilty conscience in his heart disappeared little by little. In the provincial capital in October, it was the time when the tiger was running amok. At noon, the bright sun shone on the students who had just completed their military posture. Each and every one of them was drenched as if they had just walked out of a rainstorm. They were sweating profusely. When the instructor said that they were done with the military posture, the students who were exhausted couldn't care less. They collapsed on the ground and didn't want to get up. Damn it, I thought I could teach her a lesson through the military training. Who knew that she didn't even participate in the military training? That bitch Yao Jing, now she's pretending to be noble and aloof, as if it's none of her business. Just looking at her makes me angry. Chapter 567. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The untouchable Yi Qian, a boy who was wearing a military camouflage uniform, said fiercely. He touched the shoulder of the boy beside him and said, "Do you have any other ideas, kid? Weren't you in the same class as her? Don't you know her flaws?" "Brother Luo, I really don't know. Yi Qian used to be invisible in class. If you spoke a little louder, you would have scared her. Ying used to take good care of her. She would help whoever bullied her." Later on, for some reason, the two sisters became estranged. In my opinion, it's Yi Qian's fault. It has nothing to do with Ying. As the boy spoke, he heard the instructor whistle. He patted his butt and climbed up from the shade. He smiled and said, "Brother Luo, let's have lunch later at the same old place. Our class is gathering. We'll leave first." Luo Ran, who didn't even have the strength to get up, waved his hand. He frowned and said unhappily, Okay. See you later." Damn it, I don't believe I can't take care of a little girl. Brother Luo, you have to be careful. Yi Qian is a little strange. The boy who left said in a low voice. He then ran back to his class to gather before the instructor's whistle was dropped. The military training sites of all the middle schools in the province were concentrated in the province's Chemical Defense Regiment. There were a total of 4 schools during the 7-day National Day holiday. A few thousand people were concentrated in the Chemical Defense Regiment for military training. Although there were many people, many old classmates who didn't study in the same school after graduating from middle school were able to gather. The province's #1 middle school was a school that was difficult to get into even if you had the money. Every time it was disbanded, there would always be students from other schools looking for their old classmates. Gradually, even Liao Jian, who studied in #16 middle school, got in touch with Ying again. It wasn't that they got in touch again. At least he knew that Ying studied in the province's #1 middle school. A few days ago, her father went to the countryside and mentioned to his father that they were both in the same chemical defense regiment. He even laughed and said that they were from the same town and were classmates. It was because of this sentence that he spoke to Ying, who had come to the military training to look after the students' bags and hand them water. It was an accident that he met Luo Ran. He was almost beaten up by Luo Ran because he spoke a few more words to Ying. Fortunately, he reacted quickly and avoided the disaster. Why did Ying attract so many boys? Wherever he went, there would be people standing up for him. It was all because of Yi Qian. Was Yi Qian someone to be trifled with? Liao Jian's legs were sore from all the standing under the instructor's orders. He thought back to that year when he was in the province's #1 middle school. He saw with his own eyes Yi Qian climb from the 1st floor to the 7th floor with his bare hands, and then from the 7th floor to the 1st floor with a whoosh. From then on, no matter how much he couldn't swallow the resentment in his heart, he could only swallow it. He couldn't afford to offend people. If he did, he might even get himself into trouble. It was best to stay away from them. Yi Qian was someone he couldn't afford to offend. That boy over there, you, come out, come out. At ease, attention. I've taught you for 5 days and you still haven't learned. Come up. The instructor standing in front noticed Liao Jian's absent-mindedness and pointed at him rudely. This was a very common thing in military training. Whoever was caught by the instructor could only say that the student was unlucky. There were thousands of students in the 2 middle schools. At noon, they even had to line up for lunch. Fortunately, the Chemical Defense Regiment was big enough to accommodate the students of the 2 middle schools. It was also far from the city. It was located in a valley in the countryside, and the environment was quite good. Chapter 568. Yi Qian got out of the car and looked at the sentries on both sides. He wondered if he should call the school. Otherwise, how would he get in? The pass from the provincial military shouldn't be used here. Sigh, it was all because of his phone call. He was so guilty that he didn't even arrange his own matters properly. The driver was a soldier from the provincial military. Just as Yi Qian was hesitating about whether to call the school, he had already walked to the sentries of the anti-chemical regiment and showed his soldier pass. After saying a few more words, he smiled at Yi Qian. Show them your student pass and you can enter. No matter what kind of troop it was, even if it was only a battalion stationed there, it was a military important place. It was impossible to enter and leave casually. There were clear rules that no one could violate. Yi Qian handed over his student pass and provincial military pass. The sentries called the teacher in charge of the logistics of the provincial first high school's second-year class in the anti-chemical regiment to confirm it. Only then did they return the 2 passes to Yi Qian and let him in. After thanking the soldier who sent him over, Yi Qian entered the anti-chemical regiment. It happened to be a few minutes past noon, and the class that was punished to stand began to disperse. Dragging their sore feet, they had to support each other to walk under the scorching sun. I can't do it, I can't do it. Jiasin, you guys go first. I need to rest for a while. I don't have the energy. As Li Qian was fat, she was at a disadvantage in such training. However, her body was very healthy, unlike other thin and weak girls who would faint for a while and suffer from heatstroke. After 4.5 days, she also wanted to faint for a while and suffer from heatstroke. However, almost all the girls in dormitory 506 were strong and healthy. None of them fainted. And Jiasin was also tired and really couldn't move Li Qian's weight. She waved her hand and said weakly, "Then go sit under the shade of the tree." Damn it, I still follow my father everywhere and don't feel tired. I really can't stand standing in a military posture every day. Perseverance is victory, and Justin. A voice that was like a gentle breeze drifted over. The voice was extremely cold, like the cool spring water in a mountain stream. The refreshing coolness drifted into the ears of the people in room 506. Yi Qian walked over. She was wearing the same camouflage uniform. Her slender legs were straight, and her skin was as white as porcelain under the sunlight. Her dark eyes were like the brightest stars in the dark night. They were so clear that one could see the ripples in her eyes. After 4.5 days of military training, all of you look like you're out of shape. But the instructor didn't collapse from anger. As she spoke, she easily helped up Li Qian, who was paralyzed and didn't want to leave. She wrapped her arm behind her shoulder and raised her eyebrows. Not leaving. Wait to be roasted alive. If it's any later, aren't you afraid that you won't even have a bite to eat? Yi Qian's appearance was so sudden that Justin and the others did not react in time. Li Qian, who was hanging on her, was still weak. She didn't react when she heard Yi Qian's voice. She said in a muffled voice, "I want to eat meat, pork belly, pork belly. I also want to eat pork trotters. Quick, let's go to the canteen." It was all thanks to her speaking that the other girls who didn't react screamed. And Justin even pounced on Yi Qian. Jane Eyre, I've waited so hard for you. I looked forward to the stars and the moon, but you're finally here. My tough days have come to an end. Chapter 569. Yi Qian's lips twitched when he heard that. He asked Yang Yi, what television show has she been addicted to recently? Can she still watch television in the army? A romantic affair. She's been talking about it since the first day of military training. It's as if she's possessed. Yang Yi also smiled. She was very angry and spoke softly. She was especially happy to see Yi Qian suddenly appear. We were just waiting for you to teach her a lesson. We can't subdue her. Li Qian leaned all her weight on Yi Qian. She was only thinking about meat. She said unhappily, I can't eat television shows. I want to eat meat. If we don't go, we'll go hungry during military training in the afternoon. I don't want to eat meat. I want to eat my Jane Eyre. And Justin was a clown. She was not normal when she saw Yi Qian. She was grinning from ear to ear. A romantic affair is really good. You must watch it when you go back. I'm not interested just from the name. I'd rather go for a run if you want me to watch this. Yi Qian freed a hand and pushed the sweaty Justin away from him. Didn't you say you had no energy just now? You have the strength to speak now. At the mention of food, Zhang Lishen swallowed her saliva and said weakly, don't mention it. I'm already drooling. Let's go. There really won't be any food later. There were thousands of people eating in the army. Although there was still food, it looked better, especially when there was no meat in the end. When Yi Qian returned, and Justin seemed to have regained her strength. She started chattering. When she mentioned the 4-day military training, it was a history of blood and tears. On the first day, I was really quite happy, especially when I got out of the car. You don't know, Jane Eyre. Those soldiers stood motionless under the sun. They were really as straight as little white poplars. Their hats and epaulets were all glowing with golden light. They were so mighty. Yang Yi turned her head and looked pitifully at Yi Qian. That's right. I was just like Justin. We were so happy on the first day. It was our first time entering the army. Soon, we'll be in trouble. In the afternoon, we'll be in a military posture for half an hour. Whoever dares to move will be circled around the field. At first, I thought they were quite friendly. They helped us carry water and luggage. But when we got onto the field, they were all black-faced tigers. Liz Han was so scared that she raised her hand and said that she wanted to go home. In the end, Yang Yi seemed to sense that it was not going to end well. He quickly stopped and changed the topic. Let's go. There aren't many people left. Our class's dining area is just ahead. Hurry up. Thousands of people didn't eat in the cafeteria. The leaders of Provincial No. 1 High School and No. 16 High School all accepted the military training rules of the anti-chemical regiment, including eating out in the wild. They all obeyed the anti-chemical regiment's arrangements. It was the first time that the school had organized such a large-scale military training, and it was also the first time that the anti-chemical regiment had organized such a large-scale military training for students. Both sides had to make countless changes before they finally settled on the military training guidelines. The moment they entered the army, they were under military management. All the students had to accept the rules of the army. Whoever dared to be arrogant would be dealt with directly. On the first day, more than 10 boys were taught a lesson. After that, they even wanted to challenge the instructor one-on-one. As one could imagine, they were taught a lesson even more miserably. Listening to the 5 of them talk, the corners of Yi Qian's mouth curved up slightly. This was school life. It made up for the regrets of her previous life. She could happily walk under the sun with her peers. No matter how harsh the sun was, she was still happy. Chapter 570. Why did she choose to come back for military training? It was because she did not want to miss out on the good times she had when she was still a student. Yi Qian. You. Why are you here? Lu Axian, the class monitor, walked out of the infirmary with a bottle of medicine in his hand. When he saw Yi Qian, he smiled in surprise and said, Teacher Tong said that you went to the hospital to take care of your family and would not come back for 7 days of military training. It's not even 7 days yet, why are you here? Yi Qian did not participate in military training. Teacher Tong mentioned this to the class. Because Yi Qian did not attend the evening self-study session, the students accepted Yi Qian's absence. Since he was discharged, Yi Qian naturally came back. Now that the vice class monitor is here, the class monitor will have less trouble. And Jessen's straightforward and generous personality was obvious to everyone in the class during military training. She was forthright and dared to take responsibility for her actions. Even the instructor said that she would join the army if she could not get into university. Because of this sentence, and Jessen held on for the sake of her pride. Lu Axian smiled, that's good news. Yi Qian, have you eaten lunch yet? Go to Teacher Tong's later and report to her. She has to arrange a bunk for you. Otherwise, you won't have a place to sleep at night. Military training is good for you. Lu Axian's grades were not the best, but he was very willing to do things for the class. Therefore, no one had any objections to him being the class monitor. He was usually a little naggy, but when he was meticulous, even the girls felt inferior to him. As a matter of fact, he began to remind Yi Qian what to do later. His finger was still pointing at Yi Qian. When he saw the camouflage uniform, he scratched his head in embarrassment. I'm dizzy from the sun. I didn't even realize that you were wearing camouflage uniform. The camouflage uniform you're wearing looks much better than the ones we're wearing. The colors aren't quite right either. Ours are more white while yours is a lot darker green. Why does it look so good? All along, Yi Qian had the habit of letting others finish talking before he spoke. When their gazes fell on him, he smiled and said, I didn't get it before this. I got it directly from the army. It should be the soldier's usual training uniform, so the color is a little darker than yours. That's not right either. Why does it fit you so well? No, no, it doesn't fit either. It's just. Lu Xian sized up Yi Qian, who was dressed in camouflage, and felt that something was amiss. When she spoke, her chin was slightly clenched, but her back was very straight. Although she was still holding on to Li Qian, there was an indescribable charm about her. It was very special and very spirited. After hearing LVXIN's words, Enchanting and the others finally reacted. Yi Qian smiled faintly. There's nothing different about you. It's just that the camouflage you're wearing is different. Enchanting, who was most familiar with Yi Qian, heard Yi Qian's cool voice and looked at the increasingly beautiful face in front of her. She couldn't tell what was different about this familiar face. Her heart was beating so fast that it made her panic. She realized that she didn't dare to look into Yi Qian's eyes. That pair of smiling, watery eyes had too much darkness that she couldn't look straight into. It was as if she had to see if Yi Qian's expression was good for her to speak. Not only Enchanting, but Yang Yi, Lu Lizhen, and Zhang Yuan, who was on the top bunk of Yi Qian, also felt the same way. No, they were even more flustered than Enchanting. Chapter 571. They couldn't tell exactly what had changed, but they felt that LVXIN was right. After sizing him up for a while, LVXIN shook his head. No, it has nothing to do with the camouflage uniform. It's your aura. That's right. After thinking of an appropriate adjective, LVXIN said seriously, your aura is very different. Even if we wore the camouflage uniform, we definitely wouldn't have your aura. Yi Qian, you look like a soldier, but we're still students standing in front of you. LVXIN's grades weren't the best, but they had always been stable. His EQ was also very high, so he was relatively sensitive. Yi Qian was wearing a suitable camouflage uniform, with a brown military belt around his waist and a pair of black training boots on his feet. He stood in the sunlight with a smile on his face, but his gaze was extremely cold. He had the aura of a soldier. It was an aura that only soldiers who had experienced the flames of war could have. Even ordinary soldiers couldn't compare to him. Yi Qian calmly observed the reactions of Enchanting and the others. He laughed. It's good to be like a soldier. If I can't get into university, I'll join the army. It's so good to join the army. You don't have to think about anything in the army. You don't have to think about grades, what you're going to eat tonight, or what you're going to wear tomorrow. The army will plan all the seasons for you. It's so convenient. Enchanting and the others couldn't help but laugh when they heard this. The strange feeling in their hearts was swept away. Yi Qian was still the same Yi Qian. He had never changed. He was still the Yi Qian they knew. LVXIN said, so that's all you think about. Yi Qian, oh Yi Qian, you clearly didn't have to participate in the military training. Now you know how tiring it is. You'll be so tired that you won't even have the strength to hold chopsticks. I haven't tried it yet, so I must. Yi Qian lowered his voice slightly. He looked up slightly and saw Luo Ran and a few boys standing not far away. They were staring fiercely at him. No wonder he felt someone was staring at him. It was Luo Ran, the boy who had threatened to block him after school. And the boy beside him. Ah, isn't this my old classmate, Liao Jian? Why did Liao Jian also come to the province to study? That's not possible, right? Principal Rong wouldn't accept a student like Liao Jian. However, it was also possible that Luo Ran had been recruited. Liao Jian, on the other hand, was so frightened by the sudden sight of Yi Qian that he subconsciously retreated. He was really afraid of seeing Yi Qian. He was afraid. He was even more afraid that Yi Qian would see him with Luo Ran. Damn it. Why was he so unlucky whenever he was involved in Yi Ying's matters? Liao Jian, who was cursing in his heart, was afraid that Luo Ran, who was not afraid of death, would go and find Yi Qian, so he said from behind, "Brother Luo, let's find a shady place to take a nap. Today is the hottest day, but it will be much cooler tomorrow. What's the hurry? Didn't I see someone familiar?" Luo Ran, who had taken off the belt around his waist, walked over and said with a fake smile, "Hey, isn't this Yi Qian? Didn't you say that you were going to the hospital to be a good student and be filial to the elderly? Why are you here?" From his voice, it was obvious that he wasn't a good student. However, he couldn't stand Boss Luo, who had donated 500,000 yuan to the school. No matter how bad he was, the school could only accept him. Lu Axian also knew why Luo Ran wanted to find Yi Qian. It was because of the basketball incident. He ignored him and said to Yi Qian, "Let's go eat first. We'll gather at 2 p.m. You can sleep for a while. You can't go back to the dorm. Just find a shady place to sleep." Chapter 572. With his classmates around, Yi Qian didn't want to talk to Luo Ran and said, "Then hurry up. I can only support Li Qian. If one of you faints from hunger, I can only leave it to the class monitor. I want to eat meat. Without meat, I won't have the strength to hold chopsticks." After Zhang Bin's reminder, and Jiasin knew that she couldn't clash with Luo Ran. She pushed Yang Yi and Lu Lizhen and said, "You can't stand anymore. Let's go, let's go. I'm afraid there's no meat, but there should be some vegetables." Lu Axian, who also didn't want to cause trouble, chuckled. He couldn't hide his gloating expression. "Although there's no meat, we can definitely fill our stomachs." This time, it was Li Qian who wanted to cry. "I want to eat meat, I want to eat meat, don't say any more. I want to eat meat too. I want to eat meat too." Even a gentle girl like Yang Yi was shouting. It was obvious how much they wanted to eat meat. It wasn't that there wasn't meat for them to eat in the military, but that the consumption was too high. They really wanted to eat. At the beginning of the military training, Luo Ran had been thinking about how to teach Yi Qian a lesson. In the end, he didn't even meet her. Now that he saw Yi Qian, how could he let her go so easily? Seeing this, he snorted coldly and walked over to block Yi Qian. "You want to leave? Aren't you quite bold? Why, are you scared now?" The boys beside him, except for Liao Jian, all laughed. "Of course I'm scared. Who is our brother Luo? Even the principal has to give him face when he sees him. Ha ha ha, brother Luo, why don't you just let her kneel down and kowtow to you and admit her mistake?" "That's right. Our brother Luo is magnanimous. If she kowtows and admits her mistake, he'll let you go." "Yi Qian, don't be so tactful. In any school, there were bad students and troublesome students. Luo Ran was both a bad student and a troublesome one. Because of his father's wealth, there was a bandit spirit among the students that said, 'Those who follow me will prosper and those who oppose me will perish.' He was close to Yang Heng in school, so he had been suppressed by Yang Heng until now. Now that he had cut ties with Yang Heng, there was no one more powerful than him to control him, so he began to act arrogantly. Yi Qian made him lose face. If he didn't get back at him, he wouldn't be able to take it lying down. Plus, with Yi Ying's incident, he had a huge grudge against Yi Qian. The words of the boys hit the nail on the head. He sneered and said, "Did you hear that, Yi Qian? My brothers are fighting for justice for me. What about you? Kowtow and admit your mistake, and apologize to Yi Ying as well. Then we'll forget about this. Otherwise," and Jiasin's eyes were already burning with anger. She had a fever and her entire face was flushed red. Yang Yi couldn't hold her back in her anger. She suddenly rushed in front of Yi Qian and shouted angrily, "Luo Ran, don't go too far." "I've gone too far. Do you know what she did to me?" In front of hundreds of people, she scolded me until my face was covered in blood. "Am I going too far?" Luo Ran was furious. He looked at Injusin with eyes full of hostility. "Who's the one who's going too far?" He kept saying, "You're the one who's going too far." His foul language was disgusting. The boys around him were even more eager to see the world in chaos. They all shouted at the side, "You too, don't bully Brother Luo because he's easy to talk to. You still have to apologize. Brother Luo, I think these two girls really don't take you seriously. They both dare to shout at you." Chapter 573. In front of his so-called brothers, Luo Ran cared about his reputation the most. When he heard what Yi Qian said, he suddenly felt that he had lost all face. He was furious. He ground his teeth and said darkly, "Who the fuck do you think you are? How dare you meddle in other people's business?" Liao Jian didn't interrupt at all. He had been secretly observing Yi Qian. He could clearly see that there was a blood-like hostility in her eyes. She looked calm and even had a smile on her lips. She was just like those people who used to look for his father. They looked amiable on the surface, but in reality, they killed people as if they were killing chickens. How could she be afraid of Luo Ran? How could she apologize? Thinking about what he said to Luo Ran in the morning, Liao Jian was so regretful that his back broke out in cold sweat. He had listened to Yi Ying's orders and told Luo Ran exactly what she said. Not to mention anything else, just that Yi Qian used to bully Yi Ying in junior high. She used Luo Ran's hatred for Yi Qian to take revenge on Yi Qian even more. "Liao Jian, since your father is working for my father, you better listen to my orders. Luo Ran from our school hates Yi Qian. As for me, you know, I hate her too. But I can't show up, and I don't want to see Yi Qian appear in front of me. Just tell Luo Ran that. He will know what to do if you don't say anything else." Yi Ying's sinister face flashed in his mind. Unexpectedly, it overlapped with Luo Ran's face. They both had the same sinister expression. While he was in a daze, Liao Jian heard a clear voice with a smile. That was Yi Qian's voice. He suddenly came back to his senses. He stole a glance and bent his body again, trying to reduce his presence. He was afraid that Yi Qian would notice him. Damn it, how unlucky. Who would have thought that he would run into her? Luckily, they weren't from the same school. When the military training ended, he would go back to his 16th high school and she would go to her provincial first high school. They would mind their own business and have nothing to do with each other. This time, it was purely to help Yi Ying and let the unlucky Luo Ran stand up for Yi Ying. How could Yi Qian not notice him? However, Luo Ran was the focus of his attention. He pulled Injusin, who had stood in front of him time and time again, behind him. He smiled and said, "Every time, before I could say anything, you would stand up for me. I can't bear to see you being bullied. The more you are afraid of this kind of person, the prouder he will be. This is the army. The instructors and teachers are all here. Do you think he would dare to hit us?" And Jiaxin was hot-tempered and had the temper of a boy. She treated Yi Qian like her own sister, so how could she tolerate others bullying her? Yi Qian had cultivated a calm temperament, and she was used to waiting for the other party to finish speaking before she opened her mouth slowly. Now that she looked at Injusin, she couldn't help pursing her lips and smiling. It seemed that the next time Injusin was around, she would have to speak first. She said softly, "It's useless for you to argue like this. Let me handle it. You stay behind and watch." She was calm and unhurried. She used this kind of attitude to deal with things so that the troublemaker would see that she was full of confidence and wouldn't dare to find fault with her. Luo ran and the boys behind him saw that Yi Qian didn't look angry at all, and even had a slight smile on her face. They couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed. For example, Liao Jian had the urge to run away. Yi Qian was indeed not afraid of them. Think about it, how could a girl who walked out of a war with a gun be afraid of them? Her body was already tainted with hostility. This alone was enough to make Fang Liao Jian and the others feel uneasy. Chapter 574. Luo ran, do you think I'll apologize to you? Yi Qian raised his eyebrows, a smile as clear as water on his lips. You accidentally threw the basketball at my face, and I was just returning it. Didn't I apologize at the time? Why, do you feel wronged again? Luo ran, you're still a guy. How can you be so narrow-minded? Ying doesn't like guys like you. Firstly, it was for his reputation. Secondly, it must have something to do with Ying. Now that he was in the military, there was Jia Axayan, who had a firecracker personality, and all the girls in the dormitory. It was indeed not a good idea to have a conflict with him. Pulling Njesin behind him, Yi Qian smiled faintly and said, the instructor is here. Feel free to look for me if you need anything. Goodbye. There was indeed an instructor walking over. After 4.5 days of military training, all the instructors knew that Luo Ran was a problematic student. The first time he was punished, it was for forcibly occupying the bathroom of a guy in his grade. The second time he was punished, it was for hitting a guy who said he couldn't even walk properly. The third time he was punished, it was for putting down the national flag and tying it around his waist. 3 different actions, each more serious than the last. The last time he tied the solemn national flag around his waist, his military training results were the worst. With this record, he couldn't even join the party. Luo ran, what are you doing? An instructor with a sharp gaze walked over and asked. Beside him was a lieutenant colonel with 2 bars and 2 stars. He was the political education director of the Chemical Defense Regiment. With so many students, the military was under a lot of pressure. They were afraid that something would go wrong, so they had to tighten their management during the students' break time. Once they noticed something strange, they would immediately send someone to deal with it. When Luo Ran stopped Yi Qian, the soldiers who were monitoring the entire field immediately noticed that something was wrong. They immediately contacted the instructor and the political education director to prevent Luo Ran from causing trouble again. Even the political education director had stepped in. Luo Ran glanced at the officer's epaulette. Originally, he looked down on normal soldiers, but now his arrogance was reduced. He said in a low voice, what can I do? I'm just chatting with a classmate. Reporting to the instructor, it wasn't a chat at all. When Njesin saw the instructor and the man beside him, who looked quite imposing, she glanced at his epaulette and asked Yi Qian quietly, 2 bars and 2 stars. What rank is this? 2 bars and 2 stars. You can also call him Ermauer, a lieutenant colonel. What kind of official? Yi Qian secretly observed the man. His gaze lightly swept over the man's badge and saw a pen cap in his inner pocket. He smiled and said, he should be a political instructor. He really knows a lot. And Njesin knew that this official was even more important than the instructor. She straightened her back and sternly said, he wanted to hit us, and even said that if my classmates kneel down and apologize, he would be magnanimous and let us go. Pa! How can a guy who hasn't even grown out his hair be considered an adult? Cough cough, cough cough. The instructor and instructor both coughed. This little girl was really quite boorish. Go back to your classes. This is the army. No one dares to do anything funny. When the instructor heard this, he immediately stood on the girl's side. This Luo Ran caused trouble every day. It was common for him to bully students. Yi Qian stood up and saluted the instructor and instructor. He said seriously, Instructor, this matter has nothing to do with her. I'm Yi Qian from Grade 1 Class 1. I'm reporting in today. This is Luo Ran. I have a small conflict with him. I didn't expect him to look for me to settle it in the army. Chapter 575. First, she took the initiative to clarify that she had just arrived. Second, it was a small conflict that Luo Ran would not let go of. Third, she was so arrogant that Luo Ran dared to bully students in the army. The instructor did not recognize Yi Qian, but when he saw Yi Qian in the army's jungle camouflage uniform saluting him, his eyes were dark, his military posture was majestic, and even his gaze was as hard as a spear. The instructor subconsciously stood at attention and saluted him as if he was meeting his superior. The political instructor also immediately returned the salute. His gaze on Yi Qian deepened. This little girl's military salute definitely had a few years of training. Her upper body had to be straight. She took a shortcut and quickly raised her right hand. Her 5 fingers were naturally straightened. Because she was not wearing a military handkerchief, her fingers were at the same height as her eyebrows. Her palms were facing downwards and slightly extended outwards by 20 degrees. She also had to ensure that her wrist was not bent. Her right arm was slightly flat and formed a line with her shoulders. This kind of military salute was standard and compliant. She could subconsciously do it like a standard frame. No matter what, she could immediately give a standard military salute. None of the students were qualified to give a military salute. They looked like it, but there was no aura inside. Okay, we understand. You guys should hurry back to class. It's almost time for lunch. Hurry up. The political instructor smiled faintly. When he looked at Yi Qian, his smile deepened. This girl must have grown up in the army. With the instructor's instructions, Luo Ran watched Yi Qian leave. His expression became even more uncertain. For a student like Luo Ran who lacked discipline, the instructor would not punish him now. He just glared at him coldly and left with the instructor without saying a word. Brother Luo, you're the most respected. Look, even the instructor doesn't dare to scold you. That officer, is the same. He doesn't even dare to fart. After the instructor and instructor left, the boys all began to lick their lips to curry favor with Luo Ran. Luo Ran was smug with just one sentence. Brother Luo, the Yi Qian you mentioned looks quite pretty. A boy with a protruding mouth and monkey-like cheeks looked at Yi Qian's back with a wretched look. He suggested, why don't we call Brother Huang and let him handle this? Deal with him. A marijuana smoker. Don't mention him in front of me. After all, this was the military base. Luo Ran did not dare to be too presumptuous. He had been taught a lesson by a few soldiers on the first day. He would endure these soldiers for now. As long as they dared to go out on the streets, he would settle the score with them sooner or later. At that moment, he was thinking about how to deal with Yi Qian in the army. Liao Jian, ask Xia Sifing from your class to look for Yi Ying. Don't tell anyone that I'm looking for her. Luo Ran didn't dare to be impudent in the army, but now that Yi Qian was here, he couldn't bear the thought of being hit by a basketball in front of so many people. He had to teach Yi Qian a lesson in the army. He had to let her know that he, Luo Ran, was not someone to be trifled with. He also had to let her know that Yi Ying was under his protection. Anyone who dared to bully Yi Ying was the same as bullying Luo Ran. It was noon, and the group of people whispered for a while before they scattered like birds and beasts under the whistle of the instructor who came back. Each and every one of them ran back to their own classes. When Yi Qian and the others arrived at the place where Class 1 was getting their food, they saw the few boys in charge of the food, preparing to close the table under the instructor's instructions. The food was very rich. There was meat, vegetables, and even braised chicken. Chapter 576. Unfortunately, they arrived too late, so there wasn't even any meat or soup left. There weren't many vegetables left, but it was still enough for them to eat. It was just that there wasn't any meat. Hey, Yi Qian, why are you here? You haven't eaten yet, right? The boys in charge of collecting the dishes saw Yi Qian and stopped what they were doing to look at their classmate whom they hadn't seen for a few days. You came back at the wrong time. There's only this much food left. The instructor in charge of Class 1 walked over. Yi Qian saluted and said, Grade 2, Class 1, Yi Qian, reporting for duty. This reporting for duty was sonorous and powerful, which made the instructor even more shocked. This wasn't a student. This was a veteran who had been in the army for much longer than him. He also had a murderous aura about him, which made him seem even more intimidating than the instructor. Yi Qian. Wasn't it just a sick family member who asked for leave to take care of the girls? Why was he here again? The young instructor, who had been tanned by the sun, returned a military salute to Yi Qian. Eat whatever you want. Come back early for dinner. Then he said to Enchanting, you guys keep coming back late. If you're on the battlefield, who knows how many of your comrades will die because of you. These words were absolutely true. Yi Qian could understand, but Enchanting and the others couldn't. Enchanting muttered softly, how can we eat all this food? It's better than nothing. Just eat whatever you want. Come back early tonight. The black-faced instructor roared so loudly that even Li Qian, who had been asking for meat, began to tremble. She cried and said, eat, eat, eat. The instructor was a young man in his early 20s. When he saw the two girls crying in front of him, he picked up a plate of pumpkin and vegetables and said, it's good that you still have food to eat. Why didn't you come back early if you want to eat something better? Come back early tonight. Make do with lunch. The few of them didn't dare to talk back. The instructors personally served them food, so they could only obediently agree and send the instructors away with their gazes. Come earlier next time. We originally left some meat for ourselves, but it was all snatched away. Let's eat vegetarian dishes. It's a good way to lose weight, the boy said optimistically. Then, he took out a stainless steel plate and added rice and dishes to the girls. Yi Qian was not a picky eater. He had trained with Principal Qin in the 100,000 jungles of the western province and had eaten raw food or wild vegetables. Yet, he still managed to survive. At this moment, it was already good enough that there was still soup and water to drink. If there was also a boiled pumpkin, his stomach would definitely be full. He didn't ask for much. He just wanted to eat his fill. But this pumpkin. Yi Qian raised his eyebrows and looked at Enchanting, who had a bitter expression on her face. She didn't eat pumpkins and was probably going to cry now. Sigh, I hate eating pumpkins the most. Enchanting felt so wrong that she felt as if she had been punished by her stepmother. She wanted to flip the plate and leave, but this was the army. She didn't dare to. In the end, she still had to make do with it. She was also afraid of the instructors. She gritted her teeth and ate the pumpkin she hated the most. She said fiercely, when we go back, I'll order a table full of meat. I want to eat braised pork. They ate at the same place. Some of the boys who had finished eating quickly were already chatting at the side. There were also a few who were sitting outside. When they saw Yi Qian, their reactions were similar to Lu Xian's. Damn, Yi Qian, why are you here? This place isn't for humans. Why did you bump into us? Is your relative discharged from the hospital and doesn't need you to take care of him anymore? Damn, if you don't take care of him in the hospital, you can take care of him at home. It's too damn tiring. We boys can't take it anymore. When the students in the class saw Yi Qian, they all greeted her happily. Yao Jing, who was sitting not far away, looked coldly and said to Yi Ying, "Did you see her? She's here. How's Luo Rant's situation?" Chapter 577. Yao Jing had her eyes on Yi Qian the moment he appeared. She passed the plate in her hand to Yi Ying and smiled. "I'm done eating. I'm going to say hi to her. You should come with me." Yi Ying wanted to say that she didn't want to go, but she suddenly remembered the conflict between Yao Jing and Yi Qian. She pretended to sigh and said, okay. I'll go with you. You don't hold grudges, but she does. I'll be worried if you go alone." Her words were really tempting. Yao Jing looked at her with a smile, as if she knew everything. She just didn't want to expose Yi Ying's thoughts. Yao Jing didn't care about Yi Ying's tricks. She only knew how to ask her family for help when something happened. She deserved to live under Yi Qian's shadow for so many years. If she was Yao Jing, she wouldn't even know where Yi Qian would be, dead by now. Yi Qian, who had just finished eating, had already noticed them. Seeing the two of them walking over together, a saying popped up in his mind, "Friends are friends. You guys eat slowly. I'll go for a walk when I'm done." Yi Qian, who had already finished eating, picked up the stainless steel plate and stood up. He smiled at his 5 roommates who were still eating vegetables and pumpkins. "If you want to eat this to lose weight, you won't look fat in winter and won't find it disgusting." 16 or 17 years old girls were at the age where they cared about their appearance. They might not be willing to just eat it, but they were still motivated to eat it for the sake of losing weight. And Jessin didn't notice anything strange. With a mouthful of pumpkin in her mouth, she waved at Yi Qian with a look of nausea, indicating that she should leave first. The anti-chemical regiment was very large, and the greenery was also quite good. Yi Qian's batch was just in time for the first military training in the province. This batch's military training was the strictest and also the most unlucky batch. Other than the reduced training intensity, the training process was based on that of the new recruits. Because there were too many people, it was impossible to do field training, and it was even more impossible to drag them out for field training. Therefore, it was modified. Eating and napping were changed to field training outside. Being outside made it easier for Yi Qian to do whatever he wanted. It also made it easier for Yao Jing and the others to find him. Yi Qian made up an excuse to leave because he didn't want to implicate Jessin and the others. He walked directly into the small forest. There were countless students lying in the forest. They were all wearing the same color camouflage uniform. Even his classmates would find it difficult to recognize them at a glance. "She's going there." Yi Ying gently tugged at Yao Jing's sleeve. Would they be discovered if they followed so closely? Also, Yao Jing's expression was not right. She looked like a criminal who had committed a crime. Her face was cold and fierce. The corners of Yao Jing's mouth twitched. She wasn't even interested in looking at her. She wanted to fight with Yi Qian with such little guts. It looked like Yi Qian had shown her mercy. Didn't she just say that she would walk a few rounds after eating? What are you afraid of? We're just going to greet her. We won't do anything. Just like what Yao Jing said, Yi Ying was indeed a little afraid of Yi Jian. She threw Xia Xifeng to the ground without saying a word and warned her several times to be careful. With all these memories, no matter how much she hated Yi Jian, she did not dare to follow her secretly like Yao Jing did. What if this wretched girl hit her? Thinking of this, Yi Ying was already afraid. Jing, let's. As she spoke, she suddenly realized that Yi Qian's figure could no longer be seen. The two of them had unknowingly walked into the depths of the small forest. Through the dense foliage, they could faintly see a green net encircling them. In front of them was a restricted area. Chapter 578. The forest was a little cold, and the leaves were so dense that even the sun couldn't shine in. Perhaps it was the intention of the anti-chemical regiment, but in some places, no one even cleaned up the broken branches. It was as if there were some fierce beasts living in the forest, and they were biting off these branches, making people feel scared for no reason. Yao Jing had been staring at Yi Qian, but because Yi Ying was tugging on her sleeve, she realized that Yi Qian had disappeared. She glared at her and gritted her teeth. Can you be a little tougher? Don't be like a child who can't stop drinking milk, okay? Let's go ahead and take a look. I don't believe she can fly. She couldn't fly, but she could climb a tree. The broken branches on the ground attracted Yi Qian's attention. It didn't look like it was broken naturally, nor did it look like it was broken by someone. Looking at the broken part, it looked like it was broken by a bullet. She climbed up the tree to take a look. It was indeed broken by a bullet. This anti-chemical regiment was interesting. This kind of training was also interesting, much more interesting than running circles. Climbing trees was also a necessary skill for a sniper. Yi Qian's barehanded climbing speed was so fast that even Principal Qin had to say, very fast. He could climb at least 3 meters in a minute. It was too easy to shake Yao Jing off at this speed. After coming down from the tree, the two of them walked to the front. Yi Qian smiled coldly, but didn't say anything. Instead, he turned and walked outside. The restricted military area wasn't a place that could be approached at any time. It was none of his business that they rushed up to get scolded. Ever since Yao Jing scolded Yi Qian last time, she had been getting closer to Yi Ying. In the principal's office, she had admitted her mistake and had a good attitude. However, she had always been a proud person. She would admit that she had accidentally scolded someone she shouldn't have. But it was impossible for her to go over just like that. Yi Qian had made her lose face in school. Not only did the students of class 1 speak ill of her behind her back, but even her own classmates did the same. Many times when she went to the washroom, she heard those gossipy women say that she deserved to be called to the principal's office for scolding a martyr. She could apologize, but she couldn't embarrass herself. Since she had already embarrassed herself, Yi Qian wouldn't have it easy either. She had to embarrass Yi Qian even more than she did. She had to let the whole school know that Yi Qian had made a fool of herself. Yi Ying was a shrewd person. Other than being narrow-minded and not being as tolerant as Yao Jing, she had great talent in reading people's minds. The relationship between the two of them seemed to have cooled down, but in the end, because of Yi Qian, their relationship became even better in the eyes of others. Even the words military restricted area could be seen clearly. No matter how brave Yao Jing was, she knew that she couldn't go any further. Just as she was about to turn around, a soldier appeared out of nowhere and shouted, "What are you doing? Raise your hands and turn around to lean against the tree." Yi Qian, who had already walked a few meters away, could still hear Yi Ying's screams behind him. He was so scared that he didn't know if his heart attack would relapse. Yi Qian smiled and walked away briskly. As for what would happen to the two people behind him, it was up to them. Because they were students, the two of them walked out with their heads and faces covered in dust after 5 minutes. "Didn't Luo Ran look for you last night? He really didn't say anything else to you?" Once they came out, Yao Jing's face was so calm that it was a little scary. He knows a lot of people. How could he not have a way? Chapter 579. Hearing this, Yi Ying could tell that Yao Jing wanted to make a move on Yi Qian. Thinking of her father's instructions, she smiled faintly and said, "What can Luo Ran do? He was taught a lesson every day in the army. No matter how brave he was, he would have to shrink back." Yao Jing wanted to kick Yi Qian out of the provincial first high school, and she had fallen into her trap. Her parents were both officials with real power in the city government. If they wanted to kick Yi Qian's ass, wouldn't it be a piece of cake? She was just an orphan. Other than her good grades, who would care about her? Her father hadn't found out who drove Yi Qian back to school, so he was afraid of hurting Yi Qian. He told her not to provoke Yi Qian in school. Moreover, Yi Qian's mother was a martyr. Even the provincial first high school knew about it. Martyr orphans would more or less receive special treatment in school. In order not to affect her future college entrance examination, no matter how popular Yi Qian was in school, she pretended not to see him and focused on her studies. At that time, she was still a little unwilling, but now she was relieved. Yao Jing, who had power in her family, also wanted to kick Yi Qian out of the provincial first high school. Why should she make a move on Yi Qian? Moreover, with Luo Ran, who used to be a gangster, one would give advice and the other would act as a hired thug. She, Yi Ying, could just watch from the sidelines and reap the benefits. Yi Ying sighed and said, "Forget it. Anyway, we're both in our second year of high school. With her grades, she'll definitely get into Hua University or Shi University in the capital. It's impossible for me to get into Hua University or Shi University, so there won't be many chances for us to meet in the future. I'll just bear with it. I've endured for 9 years from elementary school to middle school. 1 or 2 more years won't make a difference. Although she used to stay at my house, we don't have any kinship. Now that she's out on her own and relying on the old principal who's sick, there'll be a lot of hardship in the future. Why should I make things difficult for myself?" As he spoke, he observed Yao Jing's expression from the corner of his eye. He saw her looking at him with a faint smile, as though she had seen through something. Yi Ying's heart skipped a beat as she quickly retracted her gaze. That's right, Yao Jing was a shrewd person. Even though she looked carefree on the surface, just like in Jiasin, she was so scheming that even Yi Ying had to be wary of her. "Ying, this isn't like you. I know that Yi Ying is not a kind person. You said that you won't fight with Yi Qian. Ying, you don't even believe your own words, let alone me." Yao Jing's smile remained unchanged as she looked at Yi Ying. "Don't say things that neither you nor I believe, lest it spoils our friendship." "She clearly went into the forest just now, but we didn't see anyone when we went in. Ha, it's obvious that she's trying to trick us. Ying, you heard what the soldier said just now. If they didn't know that there are students here for military training, they could have fired a warning shot just now. Ying, Yi Qian wants us dead. I don't believe that you don't know." She kept smiling. Although she was smiling, her smile was so cold that it made the hair on Yi Ying's back stand on end. She was panicking. Similarly, Yi Ying used her smile to hide her panic. She smiled and asked, "You don't have to be so nervous. The soldier's words were just to scare us. What else can we do? What else can we do? Yi Qian has a firm foothold in the school. Even if I want to kick her out of the province, do you think I can do it just because I want to?" Chapter 580. Jing, I'm just a student. My father is just a small government employee in a small city. As for my mother, she's just a woman from the countryside who doesn't know anything. My parents aren't as good as yours. Even I'm not as good as you. Jing, what do you think I should do? Yi Qian was speaking the truth. Yao Jing retracted her creepy gaze and stared at Yi Qian, who was talking to a few boys. She smiled and said, "You really can't do it. It's hard for me too. Based on your honest words, I'll tell you that I've never thought of kicking Yi Qian out of the provincial first high school. It's difficult." It wasn't just difficult, it was simply impossible. That day in the principal's office, she knew that it would be much easier for her to get kicked out of the school than for Yi Qian. As long as the army opened their mouth and sent a military letter to her parents' unit, not only would she have to bear the consequences, her parents would also be implicated. Her thoughts of chasing Yi Qian out of school were instantly extinguished. He might not be able to do it himself, but he couldn't stand up to others. No, it should be said that he couldn't stand up to Yi Qian's thin skin. After being teased by his classmates time and time again, he finally took the initiative to drop out of school. It wasn't as if this kind of thing hadn't happened before. In junior high, the female lead who opposed her in class couldn't stand the teasing and malice of her classmates. In the end, she dropped out of school and left with her tail between her legs. Yi Qian was also a girl. Girls were all prideful. As long as he made use of her a little, he would succeed. If things didn't work out, there was still Ying. She was the one who couldn't bear to see Yi Qian doing well. "I'm not thinking about it anymore. Anyway, Luo Ran has already found her. As for what to do, it's up to Luo Ran." Yao Jing narrowed her eyes slightly. She had an oval-shaped face, and her facial features were also lively. Her eyebrows were like willow leaves, and her eyes were like crescent moons. When she smiled, she looked like the moon in the water. She always wanted to get closer to take a look. "Tomorrow morning, bring us to the shooting range to watch the soldiers training. Although we can't get close, I've asked the instructor in my class. He said that it's possible for each class to send a few representatives to take a look. Our class hasn't been decided yet, but from Luo Ran's tone, he really wants to go in and touch the gun. What about your class? Did you choose anyone?" Yao Jing's smile was a little calculative. Not knowing was also a good thing. Ying glanced at her. She didn't quite understand why she was saying all this out of the blue. She didn't know what was going on, but she didn't say it out loud. She just smiled and said, "I'm not the one going. I'm still delivering water and medicine to my classmates." It had to be said that Ying was indeed a very scheming person. She had scolded Yi Qian in front of the whole class, which had caused her image to suffer a huge blow. However, during the military training these few days, she had managed to salvage her image bit by bit. On this point, Yi Zhifan had indeed taught her well. Ying did not take the bait, but Yao Jing was not in a hurry. She still had Luo Ran. Whatever she wanted to do, she would be able to do it. Thinking about how Yi Qian had purposely tricked her and lured her to the restricted military zone, Yao Jing couldn't suppress her anger. Good, very good. If he wanted to let Yao Jing have a taste of bullets, then he might as well let Yi Qian have a taste of them first. This time, if she could directly get rid of Yi Qian and the army, then it would be interesting. Would the army still find trouble with the army? Also, Ying had said that Yi Qian had no one to rely on and only relied on the old principal. Did that mean her family didn't even know that Yi Qian had the support of the army? Chapter 581. She could make use of this to tie a simple-minded person like Luo Ran to a scheming person like Ying. She had promised the principal that she would not cause trouble for Yi Qian, but how could she guarantee that others would not cause trouble for Yi Qian? The person in front of her, was someone who wished that she could immediately kick her sister out of school and trample on her for the rest of her life. Ying did not know that Yao Jing was harboring such malicious thoughts. She watched as Yi Qian got along well with Enjussin and the rest, while she had given in to Yao Jing in all aspects during high school. She even risked being caught by the teacher to pass her the answers, but in the end, she did not get any benefits. Dandin and Lu Mei were the same. They relied on their family's wealth and did not care about her at all. She had to admit that Enjussin was right about one thing. Friends should not abandon each other, unlike her and Yao Jing, who would first think of not being implicated when something happened. Yao Jing was good at scheming. She did not dare to have a close relationship with such a friend. She could not easily reply to her words. She wanted to see what else she wanted to do with Luo Ran. After chatting and laughing, the students quickly took an afternoon nap under the shade of the tree. Yao Jing walked out of the forest and saw that Yi Ying did not reply to her for a long time. She stood up and yawned. "I'm going back to class. I'll look for you tonight. I'm so tired. You should rest for a while too. Even though it was just delivering water, I can see that you're quite tired." As the two of them spoke, they saw Yi Qian, who had disappeared into the forest, sitting beside Enjussin. It was as if he had never left. Yao Jing's gaze shot over like a knife. She was almost shot by the soldiers just now, but she was sitting there chatting as if nothing had happened. "Yi Qian, just you wait, just you wait. Where did you go just now?" Liao Jian was just here, and Luo Ran was also here. Now the two of them are together again. TSK, nothing good will happen. Just now, when Yao Jing came out from the forest, she glared at you several times. She's full of evil tricks. And Justin was much more cautious than before. She also knew how to observe people in secret. Taking advantage of the fact that only she and Yi Qian were around, she whispered, "Don't run around for the next 2 days. Liao Jian and Xia Sifeng are both in number 16 high school. Our school happens to be having military training with number 16 high school. If I hadn't bumped into Liao Jian and Xia Sifeng that day, I really wouldn't have known that the two of them were in number 16 high school. It turned out that it wasn't number 1 middle school, but number 16 middle school." Yi Qian closed her eyes and said lazily, "Don't worry. If they really want to cause trouble in the army, then it's their own bad luck. Go back to your class. I want to sleep too. I'm so sleepy. Can you still sleep with all of them together?" And Justin grumbled in dissatisfaction. Then, she followed suit and lay down in the shade of the tree. Her back was scalded by the heat. "It's so hot. How can I sleep? Let's go back to the dormitory. It's a bit far. We can just run back when the time comes." Then, she saw Yi Qian's brows relax as if he was lying on the bed. He raised his hand and gently shook her shoulder. Surprised, he said, "You're really going to sleep? It's so hot. Even if it's hot, you still have to sleep. All the good places are occupied. Where are you going to find a cooler place? It's good enough that there's shade here." Yi Qian yawned. She hadn't had a good night's sleep in a while. Now that she was back in the country, she was in a familiar place in the army. She was with her best friends. Her body and mind were completely relaxed. She didn't care if the ground was hot or not. Chapter 582. Her eyebrows softened as she spoke, and her breathing became light and long. She was really fast asleep. It can't be. She really fell asleep just like that. And Justin clicked her tongue. She tried to lie down again, but in less than a minute, she sat up like a fried fish. No, she really couldn't sleep here. She learned from the other students and slept on their shoulders. Out of the 50 to 60 students in the class, only Yi Jian and a few other boys were sleeping soundly on the hot ground. The rest of the students leaned against each other or went into the woods to sleep against the trees. It was indeed a bit far from the dormitory. They had to pass through 2 large fields before reaching the barracks. They really didn't want to walk under the sun. I really don't know if it's because you're so careless that you can still sleep with everyone together. One Liao Jian, one Xie Sifeng, and one Ying. You've got all the bad guys in junior high. Now that you have Yao Jing and Luo Ren in senior high, don't you think you're born to be hated? And Jesin poked Yi Qian's face with her finger. She couldn't stand the temperature of the ground, so she found another place to take a nap. Yi Qian slowly opened his eyes before she got up to leave. The shadow of the tree cast in his eyes was like a thin layer of fog, giving him an unfathomable coldness. Why? In her previous life, she really wanted to ask Ying why. Why was she always against her? Not only did she leave school early because she was framed by her, but she also became an unregistered student who couldn't prove her identity. She didn't have an identity card wherever she went. She gave in again and again, but ended up like that. She couldn't accept it. In her second life, there was no why. Because as long as she rose up and grew, she wouldn't be restricted by others. She wouldn't be bullied by Ying anymore. She took the right step and won every step after that. Why was Ying still against her in this life? There was no need to ask. She knew in her heart that it was because of jealousy. Everything started from jealousy. She was jealous that she had to rely on Ying to survive, but she suddenly learned how to resist. She was jealous that her grades were worse than hers, but she became the top student in class. She was even more jealous that her grades were better than hers, but she was better than her day by day. Just think about it. Her sister, who was inferior to her in every aspect, suddenly made a comeback. With Yi Ying's narrow-minded personality, how could she accept it so easily? If she couldn't accept it, she could only think of ways to suppress it. However, if she wanted to maintain her good image, she would definitely think of using other people's hands. Xie Sifeng, Liao Jian, and Luo Ran were Yi Ying's hands. As for Yao Jing, she was not someone Yi Ying could order around. She could only order Yi Ying around. Yi Qian was about to fall asleep immediately, but because of Jesin's words, his drowsiness gradually disappeared. Instead, he thought about Yao Jing. As he thought about it, Yi Qian vaguely realized the reason behind the conflict between them. Yi Qian, a girl from number 16 high school is looking for you. A boy found Yi Qian and saw that her eyes were still open. He said softly, he said that he's a good friend of yours from junior high. He's waiting for you in front. The resting place was in the green forest of the Chemical Defense Regiment. There was a small forest beyond that. After passing through the small forest, there were sentries standing guard. It was considered a restricted area. He pointed in the direction of the sports field. Yi Qian stood up and looked over. She saw a girl standing in the shade of the trees and pacing back and forth impatiently. Chapter 583. Isn't that Xie Sifeng from 16th High? She looks like she's grown a lot taller, and her temper has probably improved as well. The boy yawned and left, but Yi Qian had no intention of going over. She wasn't so close to Xie Sifeng that she would go over just because she called out to her. After taking a look, she saw Jesin leaning against a tree and falling asleep. Yi Qian smiled and walked over to sit next to her, using her back as a pillow. After a few minutes, Yi Qian quickly fell asleep again. Xie Sifeng, who was standing not far away, waited for a full 10 minutes without seeing Yi Qian. Her impatience had already expanded to boiling point. Chewing gum in her mouth, she didn't have the patience to wait any longer. She glared at the direction of the little forest and trotted away. Liao Jian, are you sure you're not mistaken? Yi Qian didn't come. Xie Xifeng, who hadn't seen for more than a year, had not only grown a lot taller, but also picked up some of the bad habits of society, such as getting tattoos, dyeing her hair, skipping classes, and going online. 16th High was a place where problematic students gathered, but it was also a high school where parents hoped their children could get a high school diploma. It was known throughout the province for smoking, fighting, drinking, and causing trouble. However, because it was a high school in the province, the entry requirements were relatively low, so there were still quite a lot of students. Xie Xifeng's grades were average, neither high nor low, and her parents ran a small business, so she could only be sent to 16th High. Liao Jian's situation was the same as hers. He didn't want to go to the city, and couldn't get into the good schools in the province, so he simply came to 16th High. The two of them were classmates, and their relationship was even better than when they were in junior high. They often skipped classes and went online together. "I'm so hot that my throat is smoking, but I still haven't seen her." Because of their close relationship, Xie Xifeng's tone wasn't as good. She glanced at another boy from the provincial high school and said angrily, "You're from the provincial high school yourself, why did I have to come all the way here? What a disgrace." The man was none other than Luo Ran. He could tell at a glance that Xie Xifeng was just a loafer like him. Seeing that she wasn't polite at all when she spoke to him, he glared at her fiercely. "Be more polite when you talk to me. Even Liao Jian doesn't dare to speak loudly to me. Don't think that I won't dare to hit you just because you're a girl." When Liao Jian saw this, he quickly tried to smooth things over. "Brother Luo, don't argue with her. She's just a straightforward person. Let her do things for you." She then pulled Xie Xifeng, who looked unhappy, and said softly, "He is the brother Luo that I always tell you about. He is very nice, loyal, and generous. If you have any problems in the future, you can always look for brother Luo. You can never go wrong." Luo Ran was overjoyed by the flattery, and Xie Xifeng's attitude also changed. "I say, Luo Ran, you've been complaining all day. Now that Yi Qian is back, why haven't you come up with any plans?" After searching for a while, Yao Jing finally found Xie Xifeng. When she saw him, she looked at Xie Xifeng and pretended to be enlightened. She joked, "No wonder you didn't even look for Ying. It turns out that you found another beautiful girl. She's from the 16th High School, right? It seems that the 16th High School is really a place with good feng shui. It's full of beauties." Luo Ran waved his hand impatiently. "What nonsense are you talking about? Yi Qian didn't take the bait. I asked her to call for help just now, but she didn't even give a damn. How about this, brother Luo, I'll try again tonight. I won't look for her directly. I'll look for Ying and ask her to come out while I'm at it." Xie Xifeng was a spineless person. When she heard Liao Jian's words, she recognized him as her brother. Now, she knew to go with the flow and try to strengthen their relationship. Chapter 584. Yao Jing's eyes flickered. After asking around, she found out that this girl named Xie Xifeng was in the same class as Yi Ying. In just half an hour, Yao Jing had found out everything about her. She also knew that this girl hated Yi Qian. After thinking for a while, she brought up the incident where she and Yi Ying were almost shot by the soldiers in the forest. Xie Xifeng exploded when she heard that. How dare Ying say that she has nothing to do with it? Is she stupid? Whatever Yi Qian did to her, she should return the favor. Let her know what's good for her. How can we return it? Yao Jing sighed and said helplessly, Ying is kind and I don't want to be a busybody. Let's just leave it at that. We don't have anything to do anyway. Forget it. You can't do that. Ying was almost forced to drop out of school by Yi Qian because of this. You guys were almost shot this time. You can't tolerate it. She should have a taste of what it feels like to be shot. Xia Xifeng was a pushover. She looked smart, but once she opened her mouth, she would fall into a trap. She was led into a trap by Yao Jing step by step. In the end, it was Yao Jing who was persuading her. Don't. We're in the military. We can't cause trouble. Besides, as long as we don't go near the forest, we'll be fine. Liao Jian secretly gave Xia Xifeng a lot of looks, but she didn't notice. Instead, she became more enthusiastic and said to Luo Ran, "Brother Luo, we can't just ignore this. As long as Yi Qian is around, Ying will have a hard time. If I don't teach her a lesson, my surname won't be Luo." With her adding fuel to the fire, Luo Ran's eyes became even fiercer. Yao Jing, on the other hand, was secretly laughing. These people, for Ying, all of them seemed to have lost their souls. They were so foolish. Don't mess around. Ying and I are fine. Don't cause trouble for us. No, I'm not talking to you guys anymore. I'm regretting it now. Seeing that she had achieved her goal, Yao Jing pretended to be remorseful. She frowned and reminded Luo Ran not to cause trouble and not to go to the forest before leaving. The cicadas were still screaming hysterically. The sun shone so brightly that the ground was white. It was not until 1:30 p.m. that Yi Qian, who had slept for a full hour, finally opened his eyes. Just as he was about to stretch, he saw a familiar face looking at him with a smile. "You're as tanned as a pretty boy from Africa." Yi Qian saw that Jiasin, who was leaning against her, had fallen asleep on another girl's shoulder. She got up gently and walked to Yang Heng's side. "It's only been 4 days and you're already so sunburned. After 7 days of military training, I'm afraid your classmates won't recognize you anymore." Yang Heng raised an eyebrow. Why is he called Feizhou's gigolo? He's slightly paler than an authentic African. Naturally, he's an African pretty boy. Yi Qian explained with a smile. When he saw Yang Heng's handsome features, an idea suddenly flashed through his mind. That day, when Yao Jing came here angrily, the first thing she mentioned was Yang Heng's name. After figuring out the key point, Yi Qian grasped the main clue. After some careful consideration, he came up with a bold guess. Yao Jing came to class 2 to cause trouble for him because of Yang Heng. Did this mean that Yao Jing actually had a crush on Yang Heng? As this thought flashed through his mind, Yi Qian couldn't help but laugh coldly. If that was really the case, it would be interesting. Rumors in school were that Yang Heng liked Ying. Even Yao Jing herself had joked that Yang Heng had a good family background and was perfect for Ying. Chapter 585. Yi Jian instantly thought of the key point as if she was enlightened. She looked at Yang Heng with a meaningful gaze. She didn't have much contact with Yang Heng, so she didn't know him well. However, in her previous life, she was forced by Ying to judge whether the person she was taking in was a good person or a bad person based on their facial expressions. Therefore, she had some understanding of Yang Heng, a 16-year-old boy who had everything written on his face. He was a bad boy, but not at the root, but at the rebellious stage. He had a bottom line and knew what he could and couldn't touch. Smoking, fighting, and surfing the internet. As long as he didn't cause any trouble, he could do whatever he wanted. Besides, his grades had always been in the top 5 of the grade, so that was enough for him to do whatever he wanted. In school, Yang Heng was a boy that the teachers didn't have to worry about. He was polite, motivated, and serious. As for what happened outside of school, sorry, but as his parents, they didn't manage him well. The teachers could manage him, but at home, his parents would. After listening to Yi Qian's laughable African gigolo explanation, Yang Heng touched his face and laughed. Am I really that tanned? Looks like I have to learn from you girls and put on some sunscreen. It's too late for that. It was almost 2 o'clock, and the students started to wake up. Yi Qian pointed to an empty space in front of him. Do you have something to say to me? Let's talk over there. There are fewer people. There were too many people, and Yang Heng was a famous person in school, so Yi Qian thought it was better to avoid him. Yang Heng was indeed looking for Yi Qian, but it wasn't convenient for him to talk about it here. Yang Heng nodded and took the lead with his long legs. Since he was tall and had long legs, he had an advantage in walking. His one step was equivalent to Yi Qian's 2 steps. Yi Qian, who had lagged behind, was impressed by Yang Heng's attention to detail. He walked so fast because he wanted to avoid arousing suspicion. There were a few spray nozzles on the field that were used to spray plants. They were turned on so that the students who woke up could wash their faces and get rid of the heat. Yang Heng came over after washing his hair. There was a faint shampoo fragrance. His handsome eyes looked at Yi Qian, and the first thing he said was an apology. He was apologizing for the incident where Yao Jing had caused trouble for Yi Qian in the classroom. He was also apologizing for implicating Yi Qian. Yao Jing and I grew up in the same courtyard. Humans are shrewd from a young age, and the older they get, the more shrewd they become. However, we're good at putting up appearances and aren't stingy with money, so we have a lot of friends. It turned out that they had known each other since they were young. No wonder the two of them looked so casual when they were talking during the basketball match. Yi Qian was not in a hurry to speak. Instead, the corners of his mouth curled up. He looked calm and unruffled in the midst of chaos. With a slight smile, he waited for Yi Qian to continue. She has a lot of ideas and schemes. She seems to be righteous, but she knows how to protect herself. You see, her friends are always in groups of 3 to 5 wherever she goes, but there aren't many who are close to her. Yang Heng, who knew Yi Qian, did not intend to hide anything. Yao Jing was someone who could help the Public Security Bureau find a suspect in 4 hours. She was also someone who could draw the facial features and height ratio of the suspect to more than 90%. If you really wanted to be on good terms with such a meticulous girl, you had to be honest with her. Yang Heng thought about every word he said, and he did not say it out loud. He knew that Yao Jing and Yi Qian were at odds with each other, so he had been looking for an opportunity to say it to her. Chapter 586. His handsome features revealed a hint of seriousness, and even his voice deepened. Yi Ying and Yao Jing seem close, but based on my understanding of Yao Jing, it's not as simple as it seems. Saying that they're good friends doesn't seem right. Saying that they don't have a good relationship. Yi Ying is the closest classmate to Yao Jing other than Wang Dandan and Lu Mei. He was a boy who wasn't used to speaking ill of others. He was just analyzing what he knew to Yi Qian. He believed that with her intelligence, she would understand what he was trying to say. What you're trying to say is that I should be wary of Yao Jing, right? Yi Qian only raised her gaze slightly. Her expression was like the faint white clouds in the blue sky, light and indifferent, exuding a quiet and elegant calmness. Actually, regardless of whether I'm wary of her or not, Yao Jing has inexplicably started to hate me. I'm not someone who can take a loss. That day, Luo Ran's basketball was obviously aimed at me, and I was just giving him a warning. As for Yao Jing, she rushed into the classroom and even dared to insult my mother. Yang Heng, do you think something like this can be guarded against? I've never provoked her in the classroom, but an unexpected disaster came knocking on my door. I believe that you also know what kind of relationship she has with Yi Ying. You and I are both well aware of what kind of secrets there are. Everything she said was the truth. Yang Heng pondered for a moment and sighed. Yao Jing can be very annoying sometimes. How about this? I'll tell her not to cause trouble every day. Please don't. Yi Qian couldn't help but laugh. Her dark eyes contained a hint of a meaningful smile. She said indifferently, if you tell her, it won't change anything. Instead, it'll make her angry. Yao Jing is a bad person. You said that she's not someone to be trifled with, but now that she's provoked me, this matter won't end easily. You don't have to get involved in this matter, lest others say that I'm using you to deal with Yao Jing. Also, they said that you like Yi Ying. Why do I feel that? You're purposely making people think that way. Yang Heng's eyes were filled with astonishment. He did mean that, but he didn't expect Yi Qian to be so direct. This was a little different from the girls he had met before. At least, he hadn't seen one so direct. It's a little intentional. Who can stand people asking you who you like, if you need her help, if you're too shy to do anything? Yao Jing has been asking me since the second day of middle school. That day, I saw that she pushed Yi Ying, so I might as well let her wish come true. A casual remark from Yang Heng had ruined Yao Jing and Yi Ying's friendship. However, Yao Jing was a patient person. She hid in the dark and did not reveal any of her thoughts. She observed both Yi Ying and Yang Heng. What a pity. Yi Jian sighed softly. What a pity. Now that she knew Yang Heng, and this guy was not bad, she could not treat him as someone who would sow discord between Yao Jing and Yi Ying. You really don't mean what you say. This matter is enough to make Yao Jing worry. Yi Qian sighed inwardly. Seeing the instructor of the first class walk towards their class, she knew that it was time for the assembly. It's time to assemble. You should go back to class. Don't get involved in the matter between me and Yao Jing. It's not as simple as you think. Chapter 587. Also, help me keep an eye on Luo Ran. He can't find trouble with me in school, but he still has a chance in the military. Help me keep an eye on him, so I'll be prepared. Yang Heng's thick eyebrows furrowed. He remembered that Luo Ran had been close to a boy from 16 High these past few days. He whispered, Yao Jing just looked for him, and he's also close to a boy from 16 High called Liao Jian. Be careful of Yao Jing, I'll keep an eye on Luo Ran for you. Based on his understanding of Yao Jing, just as Yi Qian said, she wouldn't give up so easily. Now that Yi Qian was also back for military training, it wouldn't hurt to be more careful. The whistle for assembly sounded, and the students who hadn't yet woken up yawned as they ran towards the assembly point. The white sunlight was still blinding even at 2:00 in the afternoon. Yi Ying washed her face with water that was a little warm from the sun. She subconsciously looked for Yi Qian, who she hated so much, but couldn't do anything about. She saw a scene that made her eyes light up. It was actually Yang Heng and Yi Qian talking. The whistle got louder and louder, urging all the students to assemble. Yi Ying looked at the time. What a pity, it was only 3 seconds away from 2 minutes. Otherwise, she would definitely pull Yao Jing over and let her see this scene. She would definitely be so angry that her liver would hurt. The anti-chemical regiment, in layman's terms, was a military unit that prevented the spread of chemical weapons. They were responsible for earthquake resistance, flood resistance, and wearing gas masks to prevent epidemics. On a deeper level, they were responsible for guiding the military to protect against nuclear, chemical, biological, and incendiary weapons. They were also responsible for coordinating with the infantry in battle. This type of military unit didn't appear often in the past, but now that they were an important force in the country's anti-terrorism unit, they were increasingly appearing in the public eye. Listening to the shocking shouts of the real soldiers in the field, Yi Qian's entire body was straight as a pencil under the instructor's instructions. He followed the students in the class from the basic movements and the posture of a soldier. After the assembly, Yi Ying gave the instructor a bone-deep military salute and stood aside to watch the other students train. She's just pretending. The instructor knows that she has heart disease and asked her to take a rest in the shade. She said, "I can hold on now. If I really can't hold on, I'll definitely take a rest." And Jiaxin almost rolled her eyes. She couldn't stand Yi Ying's behavior anymore. Yi Qian was afraid that her eyes would hurt, so he said softly, "That's enough. She won't bother you. Just don't pay attention to her. Also, she's close to Luo Ran now. Don't let her hate you too. If she hates me, then so be it. I can't wait for her to hate me a little, so that she won't only stare at you every day. See, I'm looking at you again. If you keep talking, you'll be the first girl to be punished by the instructor in the afternoon training." Yi Qian noticed the instructor's sharp glare and reminded him, "Don't do the same thing more than 3 times. If you say another word, you'll definitely be dragged out." Knowing the consequences of being punished, and Jiaxin immediately shut up. Yi Ying originally wanted to stand for more than 10 minutes and pretend that she couldn't hold on any longer. But when she saw Yi Qian here, she began to think of a way to embarrass Yi Qian. From the moment she stood at attention and relaxed, her gaze never left him. Chapter 588. As the last student to participate in the military training, the instructor naturally paid more attention. Especially when the girl reported to him, she stood at attention and saluted. That standard was even more exemplary than that of a veteran soldier. She exuded a piercingly cold military might that made one's heart tremble. Now that he paid more attention, he could see how solid the girl's basic skills were. "Yi Qian, step forward." 20 minutes into the drill, the instructor gave the order to take a break, then called out Yi Qian's name. "Come, stand in front and demonstrate." She stepped forward. The first one who couldn't hold back was Yi Ying. She stood at the back, looking as if she would collapse from heatstroke at any moment. She said softly, "Instructor, I saw that her posture when she took a break just now wasn't right. She didn't look as good as the other students. We still have a drill performance. It's a competition of ranking and points. If one person doesn't do it well, the whole class will be dragged down." She spoke slowly and softly. It sounded as if she was really thinking for the class. Some of the students in the class also supported Yi Ying's words. After all, this military training would be recorded in the files. There were only benefits and no disadvantages. Everyone wanted to get a good ranking so that the instructor could write a few beautiful words on the file. Hearing this, some students nodded in agreement. Seeing that some students nodded, Yi Ying wasn't surprised at all. On the contrary, since she said it, she was sure that someone would stand up for her. She said, "We only have 2.5 days. It's not certain if we can train well. Tomorrow is the field training for the 5 classes. It's still a question whether she can keep up." After saying so much, she just wanted the instructor to train Yi Qian harshly and make her suffer under the sun. "Why don't you, Yi Qian, don't participate? Anyway, you didn't come for the first 4 days. The teacher won't blame you. The instructor won't scold you either. Don't drag the class down." The one who spoke was a girl. Usually, she didn't talk much with Yi Qian, but she was a girl who was very strong in her studies. "Yeah, why don't you, Yi Qian, don't participate? It's a thankless task. Don't do it. It's not that big of a problem. Yi Qian can choose not to come, but since she's here, it means that she's a member of our group. Why should we not allow her to participate? Yi Qian has only just arrived. He'll definitely drag us down. You guys are stupid. No matter when you come, you'll always be a hindrance. This morning, you've practiced the midair rotation technique for God knows how many times, and now you've learned it. Can you not act like a big shot here? Yi Qian is Yi Qian. What makes you think she can't do it? We are the first batch of military trainees in the whole province. The requirement is to have a standard. What if Yi Qian doesn't make it? What if I can't keep up? There's no what if. Since Yi Qian dared to come, it means that she will definitely succeed. She was not one to put on a brave front. If he came, he would succeed. I'm definitely not inferior to you guys. In an instant, the students were divided into 3 groups. One group opposed, one supported, and one watched from the sidelines. And Jessen wanted to step forward and say a few more words, but she tactfully glanced at Yi Qian, who had been pushed into the limelight by Yi Ying. Seeing her gently shake her head, and Jessen shut her mouth tightly. Seeing that the voices of Class 1 were getting louder and louder, they were particularly eye-catching on the field. Many classes turned their gazes over. Because the students' voices were too loud, each and every one of them was filled with the smell of gunpowder. The instructor immediately blew a sharp whistle to warn them when he realized that his loud voice was not enough to deter them. Chapter 589. The sharp whistle made the instructors of the other classes immediately stop their training and rush over to support their comrades in order to control the students who had suddenly become agitated. The political instructor also rushed over. These students were all important targets to be taken care of. During military training, it was fine if they fainted from heatstroke or suffered some minor injuries, but if they started fighting right under the eyes of the instructors, the situation would become serious. Yi Qian didn't expect that Yi Ying's few words would cause such a scene. Yi Ying was also quite surprised that a few words had such a big effect. Her original intention was to let the instructors teach Yi Qian a lesson and embarrass him in front of the class. Who knew that it would cause a group argument in the class? Look, some of the boys were even about to fight. Yi Ying's eyes flickered and she walked over obediently. Do you see Yi Qian? I said before that you want to fight with me. Do you think you're worthy? Amidst the quarrel that grew louder and louder, she laughed softly. What do you think? Do you like this kind of welcome ceremony? You definitely won't like it, but I like it. How pitiful. You'll definitely be the one who gets scolded the most when they start scolding you. Do you think you'll be accepted by the students just because you're back? Yi Ying's smile became even more smug. The arrogance between her brows was just like in her previous life. On the first day of military training, the principal and provincial leaders emphasized that the results of this military training are very important. If we don't face the consequences well, there will be serious consequences. Do you know how many students in our class want to get into university? Do you know how many students are worried that if something goes wrong during this military training, it will affect their college entrance exams? Do you know? Ignoring her made her even more arrogant. Yi Qian tilted his head and lowered his gaze slightly. He looked at Yi Ying, who was half a head shorter than him, and looked down at her with a condescending gaze. She raised her eyebrows slightly. Her smile was calm and composed as she said indifferently, "You really know how to worry. Shouldn't a patient with heart disease be resting properly? You're always scheming about this and that and sowing discord. Aren't you afraid that your heart will get tired and go on strike?" Yi Qian knew that she didn't have a heart condition, so he deliberately said those words. He admired the way her face changed from anger to anger. He smiled coldly and said, "Think about it carefully. Every time you've schemed against me, have you ever succeeded? It seems to have never happened before." This really made Yi Ying's heart ache. It was precisely because he had not done it even once that she hated him. The more he hated him, the more he wanted to teach him a lesson. Yi Ying, cover your face properly. Don't hit it too hard later. After Yi Qian finished speaking, she lifted her chin slightly. The coldness in her bright and exquisite eyes deepened, making her seem even more profound and unfathomable. Today, Yi Qian was able to deal with accusations calmly. She was confident that she could easily resolve such a small matter. She also had the ability to plot against Yi Ying time and time again, and finally turn it into a slap to Yi Ying's face. Yi Ying's expression suddenly darkened. She gritted her teeth and said fiercely, "Don't be so smug here. This time, I'd like to see how you're going to explain this to your classmates and to the school. The whole class is fighting over you. Yi Qian, you really have a lot of face. With such a big face and such a big stance, I'd like to see how you're going to deal with this." Chapter 590. Of course, they would deal with her as they should. In the face of Yi Ying's uncontrollable arrogance, the corners of Yi Jian's mouth curled up slightly. The coldness between her brows was as if she was preparing for a battle. At the same time, it made her brows look even more beautiful, but at the same time, it also revealed a cold hostility. "Do you know why I didn't step in to stop you?" Looking at Yi Ying, who was still waiting for her to be unlucky, her smile was also dazzling. "Because I'm not the one who started this, it's you." In the army, a team, a group, could not be separated, let alone destroyed. Yi Ying had obviously made a big mistake, but she still thought she was infallible. Yi Ying was too inexperienced. So inexperienced that she did not want to make a move at this time. Because there was no value in making a move. At this moment, Yi Ying's faintly proud face suddenly revealed a trace of panic. She wanted to ask for clarification, but she saw Yi Qian walk to the instructor's side and say something. The instructor actually nodded slightly. He, who never smiled during training, even twitched the corners of his mouth. It was obvious that he was smiling at Yi Qian. The slight panic she felt at first really expanded now. Not only did she panic, but she also had a faint bad premonition. Yi Qian, what was this wretched girl trying to do? She hadn't even been in the army for 2 hours. How could she make the usually strict instructor smile? Perhaps it was because of the hot weather, but the boys and girls were all hot-tempered. Yi Ying threw out a fuse, and immediately ignited the fire in everyone's hearts. Even the instructor's sharp whistle didn't stop. Although the students from the other classes were ordered to rest on the spot by their instructors, some busybodies still came over to watch the commotion. Luo Ran was one of them. When he heard that the quarrel was because of Yi Qian, he also raised his voice. "She's obviously here to drag the class down with evil intentions. You bunch of idiots, you've all been fooled by her. Applying for leave means that your military training score is 0. Yi Ying from your class has a heart condition. Originally, she applied for leave too, but in the end, she still came together because she was afraid that her military training score would drag her down. You bunch of idiots, Yi Qian will also get points if she sneaks in. She's here to drag your ranking down, do you understand? A bunch of idiots." When the political instructor saw this, he waved his hand and an extremely unfamiliar instructor walked over. Without saying anything, he directly threw Luo Ran to the ground. With one hand pressed against the back of Luo Ran's head, from the front. Luo Ran's facial features were squeezed out of shape by this instructor. Whoa. He still wanted to struggle, but in the end, not only could he not even make a sound, his entire body was suppressed to the point where he could not move at all. After this instructor made a move, the rest of the instructors separated the two groups of people who were quarreling. They stared fiercely at these students who were causing trouble without any team spirit. Idiots, he's right. You guys are just idiots. Yi Ying was overjoyed. Even the instructor said so. Yi Qian, you... Before the joy could reach his face, he heard another instructor scolding, looks like I've been teaching you for nothing every day. I've been telling you guys to have team spirit every day. Everyone is tied to the same rope. The one who wants to cut this rope is your real enemy. Her joy instantly disappeared. Why did she feel like the real enemy the instructor was talking about was her? Yi Qian glanced at her, then followed the instructor to the political instructor. Yi Ying was the one who started this, but for the sake of the entire group, she had to step forward. Chapter 591. The instructor had a very deep impression of Yi Jian. A student standing in front of him was a soldier. He had never had such an impression before. Students were soldiers, unless they were military school students. The noisy scene was suppressed by a few instructors in a short while. The instructor stood in front of them with a cold military aura and a face as cold as water. His sharp eyes swept across the faces of all the students. All the noise gradually stopped, and finally, there was complete silence. You said that the last student would drag the class down, right? I wonder who said that first. The first person to speak, please step forward. After suppressing the scene, the instructor spoke. His gaze was calm, but not a single student dared to look him in the eye. He silently used his military aura to intimidate all the students. At the same time, Yi Ying, who was standing at the side, trembled. She didn't step forward because she didn't dare to. Why? Why didn't things go according to her plan every time? Why did all kinds of situations happen? This officer didn't even know Yi Qian. All the students were arguing because of Yi Qian. Why did he look for her first and not Yi Qian? The bad feeling grew stronger. Yi Ying closed her eyes slightly, took a deep breath, and walked over step by step with determination. Instructor, I said it first. Because Yi Qian just enlisted today, I couldn't help but take a few more glances while I was resting next to him. One thing about Yi Ying that was quite admirable was that she would take the initiative to admit her mistakes. Once she realized that something was wrong, she would immediately step forward to admit her mistake instead of denying it and trying to play smart to avoid it. Yi Qian also admired her for this. After all, not everyone had the courage to take the initiative to admit their mistakes. The instructor didn't lose his temper immediately. Instead, he looked at her with bright eyes and asked in a deep voice, "What were your original words? Can you repeat them for me?" They were all students, not real soldiers under his command. He couldn't beat them or scold them. He could only educate them. No matter how he educated them, he had to look at the source of the chaos. I didn't say anything else. The instructor asked Yi Qian to step forward. I only said that I noticed that her at-ease posture wasn't right. It wasn't as good as the other students. He also mentioned that we have an exercise performance, and that we have to compete for rankings and scores. If one person can't do it well, the whole class will be dragged down. Yi Ying repeated what she had said, and her frantic heartbeat gradually calmed down. She did not say anything else. She was thinking for the sake of the class. She did not say anything wrong either. Even if the instructors were to pick and choose, they would not be able to find fault with her. Yi Ying's speech was indeed difficult to find fault with. Her IQ was indeed high, but she just couldn't meet Yi Qian. Once she met Yi Qian, she would try to find fault with him. In the end, she would be the one making a fool of herself. This was Yi Ying's biggest flaw, she couldn't tolerate it. Yao Jing's IQ was definitely not as high as Yi Ying's, but her advantage lay in the fact that she could endure and plan slowly, unlike Yi Ying who jumped out at the slightest thing. After the instructor finished his question, he saw the instructor nod lightly, confirming that Yi Ying had indeed said that. "Student, your intentions are good, but the bad thing is that you shouldn't have made rash comments when you didn't know the truth." The instructor was also a man. Although he was meticulous, he could not see through Yi Ying's thoughts. Instead, he criticized her. "Even if you really saw something wrong with her, you should first report it to the instructor. Don't use your rash judgment to elevate the class's reputation." Chapter 592. You are a team. One person can't represent the glory of the team. What you said seemed like you were worried about the class, but have you thought about the consequences? This kind of criticism was extremely light. In the army, it was no different from giving pointers while eating. But to Yi Ying, as long as it was because of Yi Qian, any kind of criticism was a great humiliation to her. She couldn't accept it. Her eyes reddened and she immediately said, "I'm sorry. I was too impatient and didn't think of the consequences. It's fine as long as you don't do it again in the future. Return to the team." The instructor saw that she had a good attitude and took the initiative to stand up for her, so he didn't have a bad impression of Yi Ying. He knew that there was a student with a heart disease in class 1. After returning to the team, Yi Ying lowered her head and wiped her tears. She bit her lower lip and held her head high with a pale face. She would not admit defeat. She would never admit defeat to Yi Qian, that wretched girl. Endure, she had to endure. Yi Qian wasn't surprised by her behavior. A smart person would immediately find something to their advantage after realizing that they were wrong. Yi Ying had always been good at this kind of thing. The current Yi Ying wasn't worthy of her help, but what about the future Yi Ying? She was really looking forward to it. The instructor gestured for Yi Qian to stand beside him and blew a whistle at all the students in class 1. He shouted with a cold voice, "Everyone. Listen to my command, line up to the right." Under the covetous gazes of the 4 instructors, including Luo Ran, who was still being pressed to the ground by an instructor and couldn't move at all, the students who almost started a fight settled down one by one. They lined up to the right and lined up to the front. Although it wasn't really a straight line, they still stood in a good line. I can understand your feelings of wanting to be ranked. Everyone wants to be ranked, even your instructors. However, you're splitting yourself apart for the sake of a ranking. You're clearly giving up on yourself. You said that the students who came last would drag you down. Come, instructor, call those male and female students who had the most objections over here. I'll review their results. What do you think? The female student who first voiced her opinion, come up as well. Since you can see the mistake in the at ease posture, you must have done a good job yourself. Come up together. In the army, what mattered was real ability. If you were capable, you could be arrogant. If you were not capable and still had the loudest voice, then you had better be obedient. Before you entered the army, it didn't matter what kind of army you were in. Once you entered the army, the first thing that mattered was obedience. If you don't have the ability and you still refuse to obey, I'll first train your skin, flesh, tendons, and bones until you become obedient. If the students couldn't train too hard, then let them open their eyes and see who would be the one dragging the class down. 6 boys and 4 girls, a total of 10 people stood up. Yi Ying stood against the scorching sun. Compared to the other 3 girls who were already terrified, her body was very straight. Although she didn't practice with the rest of the class every day, she still participated in the morning exercises. Compared to the wretched girl who only practiced for less than half an hour, she didn't believe that she couldn't win. With confidence, she naturally straightened her back. She even reminded the girl beside her whose shoulders were curled up, "I'm not afraid, so what are you afraid of?" She didn't even practice for a day, but you practiced for 4.5 days. Chapter 593. The girl didn't answer. She wasn't afraid that she wouldn't be able to walk well. She was afraid that she had only said a few words, but the instructor had heard everything and even called her out. What if the word disunity was added to her file? What should she do? It's over. If you were the one who did this, Yi Qian would have to bear the consequences. Wang Dandan, who had a good relationship with Yao Jing, said softly. Her eyes flashed with a look of disappointment. Yi Ying is still too inexperienced. She's obviously smart, but why can't she grasp the opportunity? This was the sophomore class 8. They were divided into classes 1, 2, 3, and 2. Class 6 happened to train at the same time as Class 1, so Class 6 was the clearest about what happened in Class 1. Initially, Yao Jing was quite interested. Yi Ying's little tricks were indeed hard to guard against. This time, her little trick was brilliant. In an instant, she had turned Yi Qian into a target of public criticism. But, when she saw her moving closer to Yi Qian, Yao Jing knew that her trick had gone wrong. If it were her, she would definitely be the one to mediate when the students started quarreling. She would talk as she mediated and make the whole thing worse. She would even incite the students who were watching from the sidelines to join the camp for Yi Qian to withdraw from the military training. Then, she would make the boys fight. Ha! Even if Yi Qian had a backer in the army, she would never be able to participate in the military training. Because of her, the whole class was at odds with each other. No matter how capable such a person was, the instructor wouldn't take a second look at her. Nothing had happened during the 4 days of training. If she caused trouble as soon as she arrived, she would become unreasonable no matter how reasonable she was. Yi Ying can't stand it. She shrinks her neck at the slightest sign of trouble. It's okay to let her come up with ideas, but don't count on the people beside her. Yao Jing watched Yi Ying walk out, then watched her and the boys stand at attention, and salute. She snorted lightly and said, "What a pity. She has a good life and a good brain, but she wasn't nurtured from a young age. She's scheming and capable, but she's still lacking a little bit of maturity." Yao Jing's parents were government officials. Her grandfather and maternal grandfather's family were both involved in politics. From a young age, her knowledge and methods were much better than Yi Ying's, who was held back by Sun Dongqing. If Yi Ying had such a family instead of being raised by Sun Dongqing, she would definitely be much more capable than Yao Jing. If she was really powerful, would you still be with her? Wang Dandan smiled. Even though her parents were not officials, her family was even more well-off than Yao Jing's. Her princess-like heirs were no less than Yao Jing's. Seeing how Yi Ying walked so elegantly despite not having much training, Wang Dandan couldn't help but sigh. It's not unreasonable for Yang Heng to like her. She does have some capabilities. I'm not saying that she can't do it. She's just a little worse than the three of us. However, Yang Heng has always liked smart girls with good grades. Yi Ying is just right for him. However, what she did not expect was that Yi Qian and Yang Heng were completely unrelated. They did not even know each other. Why would Yang Heng beat Luo ran up for her? She only knows how to fan the flames, but she doesn't know how to add fuel to the fire. If Yi Ying wants to bite down on Yi Qian, she will only injure her teeth. Wang Dandan was also a smart girl. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been able to hang out with Yao Jing. From the corner of her eye, she saw the instructor in the class walk over. She secretly pulled Yao Jing, who was deep in thought, and said, "The instructor is here." Chapter 594. The ruckus in Class 1 had stopped. The instructors of each class had returned to their own classes to continue the military training in the afternoon. As usual, the main content of the lesson was to execute the formation command. After the whistle sounded, they took a break and stood at attention rhythmically. Sweat had already soaked through their hats, collars, and backs. Even their waists where their belts were tied were drenched in sweat. The students of Class 1 had completed the process of standing at attention, taking a break, saluting, walking in unison, marching, and running. When the instructor called for them to take a break, the 10 of them, whose faces were flushed from the sun, let out a long sigh of relief. Fortunately, they kept up and didn't make any mistakes. Although there are big and small steps, it's not bad to be able to maintain the same pace. Walking in unison and marching in unison is a bit off from the formation. You still need more training. The instructor nodded slightly. He was satisfied with the results of the 10 students. As students, you're not bad. You can keep up with the formation. However, as a soldier, you're still too far behind. Yi Ying's tense expression relaxed a little after hearing that. As long as they passed, then Yi Qian. If he made any mistakes, he would definitely not be able to participate in the military training. The entire class would know that her participation was purely a burden to the class. With the lesson learned from the previous incident, Yi Ying held back even though she wanted to speak. If she spoke again, the instructor would be suspicious. He would think that she purposely stood up and said those words for the sake of the class to make Yi Qian leave. Yi Ying did the right thing here. If she spoke again, the instructor wouldn't be suspicious. He would think that she was wrong. After one of the boys saw that he had passed, he let out a sigh of relief and immediately said, "Instructor, we're students, not soldiers. So, you can't say that we're too far behind. That's biased. There are a lot of shortcomings. Didn't the instructor teach you that you need to report if you have a problem?" It was obviously an extremely unwise move to try to talk to the instructor who was in charge of ideological work. Just based on this point, I can give you a fail. It's fine if you're not convinced. In the military, you have to be convinced when you wear this camouflage uniform. The last sentence was no less shocking than a sudden clap of thunder. In an instant, the boy, who thought he had passed and was somewhat proud of himself, was so scared that his shoulders trembled. The instructor's stern gaze swept across all the students who were causing trouble. His face was even darker than before. You haven't even done your job properly, yet you dare to stand out and criticize others. If you are the last in class and have the lowest grades, I can tell you that it's definitely not your fault. Yi Qian didn't say a word. He just watched the tutor scold the rowdy students until they couldn't even raise their heads. Yi Qian could understand why they got into a fight because of Yi Ying's words. But if she had to speak up for them. Yi Qian's lips curled up slightly, and there was a cold glint in her eyes. That was impossible. These people had been dissatisfied with Yi Ying ever since school started when she casually said that it was unfair. Especially one of the girls, Meng Wen, who immediately stood up to oppose Yi Ying after she finished speaking. Meng Wen usually didn't talk much to her. Usually, whenever the teacher called her name in class, Meng Wen would stand up and voice her opinion. She didn't have any opinions about learning to excel, but she shouldn't cause a ruckus at a time like this. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.